of the budget. I can't seem to find where I found it online last time.
If you go onto the county website,
Yep, I'm on there.
okay, go under county administrator and then budget.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, I was on the phone too.
Lisa, can you hear me? I'm checking my audio.
Hello.
I can hear you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That'll be green.
Okay.
Hey, Russ, do you have your TV on?
No.
Lisa, can you hear me? This is Kara.
I can
Want
hear
me to
you.
turn it on?
Thank you. All right, it is 6:01 p.m. and I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. It is Thursday, October 29th, 2020 at 6 p.m. And at this time, I will ask Supervisor Rashkin to lead us in the invocation and pledge of allegiance. Could everyone please stand?
I'd like to lead everyone tonight in the Buddhist prayer for peace. May all beings everywhere, plagued with suffering of body and mind, quickly be freed from their illnesses. May those frightened cease to be afraid, and may those bound be free. May the powerless find power, and may people think of befriending one another. May those who find themselves in trackless, fearful wilderness, the children, the aged, the unprotected, be guarded by beneficial celestials, and may they swiftly attain Buddhahood. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
For which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Supervisor Ashkin. Next item, please.
Next item is roll call. Agutter,
Here.
Beaver,
Present.
Baumkamp,
Here.
Pam Bostwick,
What am I not? Oh,
Here.
thank you. Rich Bostwick,
Here.
Brian,
Here.
Davis,
Here.
Fox,
Here.
Justina,
Here.
Holman, Knutson,
Here.
Levy,
Here.
Lokrantz,
Here.
Mulwiney,
here.
Mulligan, Pierre,
Present.
Podzilny,
Here.
Potter,
Present.
Rashkin,
Here.
Richard,
Here.
Renish,
Here.
Scholes,
Here.
Sweeney,
Supervisor
Taylor?
Sweeney will be a few minutes late.
thank you. Taylor,
Here.
Wildy,
Here.
Williams,
Present.
Yeomans,
He's here.
Yeomans is here. Twenty-five present, 3 absent, 1 vacant.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Next item is consent agenda. Since we have nothing under consent agenda, I'm going to jump down to number 6. Citizen participation, communications, and wait, I do need to approve the agenda, don't I?
Yes, please.
Yes. For a adoption of agenda,
Moved by Supervisor Potter.
Second by Supervisor Bostwick.
Did you
who
get
is
that?
my second?
Davis.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Lisa, did you end up getting a second?
I believe I have Davis. Is that correct?
Yes.
Any changes to the agenda at all, Josh?
No changes.
All right. Okay. Any objections to the agenda at this time? All right, hearing none. The agenda is approved by unanimous consent. Next item.
Item 5, public hearing. We do not have a public hearing. Item 6, citizen participation, communications, and announcements. We only have 1 public comment this evening. Agenda topic 11. New business. I'm writing to express my opposition to the addition of an equity manager to Rock County staff. First of all, I challenge the Board of Supervisors to identify and then repeal the laws in our county that discriminate based on ethnicity. I have looked long and hard and found none. Racism is not a public health emergency in Rock County. The disparities that we see in our communities are not caused by a racist system. By adding this position, you will continue to perpetuate a lie. I write this as an immigrant whose immigrant parents, who do not even speak English, are business owners in Rock County. While my antidote does not determine reality, it seems like the systemic racism you speak of has missed my family. It is not the government's job to bring people together. Your job is to bring justice. Please do not continue to lie to the people of Rock County. Vote no in the addition of an equity manager. Full name is Angela Louise Rodriguez Perez. That is the only public comment that we had.
Thank you, Lisa. Next, I will open it up to communications and announcements from supervisors. Are there any supervisors with communications or announcements at this time? All right, hearing none, is there any staff with communications or announcements?
Annette has an announcement.
Okay, go ahead.
Good evening. On behalf of Randy Terrones, I would like to remind all of our county board supervisors that if you are interested in attending the YWCA, the Bridge to Eliminate Racism and Commit to Action, it's the 6th annual conference that the YWCA is having on racial justice. It's November 12th and it's virtual. If you have not signed up yet and you are still interested, please let Marilyn know by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. The cost is $30 and that is being covered by the county. And just to give you some information, as of yesterday, we had 323 county employees that were registered to attend. So the virtual format is awesome in that there's not a cap on the number of people that are able to fit into the rooms at the Holiday Inn. So we have a phenomenal countywide turnout. And again, just extend that invitation to you and just please let Marilyn know by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks, Annette. And just to follow up on that as well, for supervisors, if you are wishing to register and be a part of that event, that is an event in which you could turn in a per diem slip for reimbursement for your time as well. So just wanted to let you know that. And I believe we also have Sheriff Knutson who had an announcement this evening.
Thank you. I want to report back to the board. There's been some interest in a grant that we applied.
Sheriff, I believe your audio is being a bit touchy.
Now,
Still not able to hear you.
perhaps I'm a little too far out in the stakes here. Maybe I can make some comments.
Call in? Can you call in?
Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
If Sheriff, if you wanted to call in, we can come back to you in just a moment. Thank you. Any other staff with announcements this evening? All right. Josh, did you want to make the announcement?
Say, Lisa,
Yeah.
this is Supervisor Mulligan, and I've been muted here by the system here. I just became unmuted. I've been here since the beginning of the meeting, and I wanted to let you know.
Thank you.
All right. So, Sheriff, we'll come back to you here in a little bit for your announcement. All right. Next item, please.
Next item is item 7, nominations, appointments, and confirmations, which we do not have any. Item 8, recognitions of county employees, which we don't have any. Item 9, introduction of new resolutions or ordinances by supervisors for referral to appropriate committee.
All right. Are there any supervisors wishing to introduce a resolution this evening? Marilyn, did you receive anything, or Lisa via email?
No.
No?
I did not either.
Okay, thank you. All right, next item, please.
Item 10, reports. We do not have a report. Item 11, new business. We do not have items under A or B. Item C, review of 2021 recommended budget with county administrator.
Thank you, Josh, whenever you're ready.
Well, good evening, everyone. For those of you who have not gone through this part of the budget process before, what it will entail is me providing you with detail department by department. So we will start in the front of the budget book. So alpha by committee, and then we'll go through each committee department by department. So what I'll essentially be doing is going through and highlighting things from the administrator's comments. So if you want to follow along in your budget books, if you have them, if you're looking online, you can find the recommended budget on the county's website. If you click on the county administrator's page, and on the left-hand side, there'll be budget information. You can find the recommended budget there. I'll attempt at times to share my screen and keep up with that as I go through to highlight some things as to where I am and what I'm talking about at the time. So that it does take a little bit of time to get through this. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them as we go through, of course, as we're on a specific item, or if you have a question about a department, I'll pause after each department to make sure there's an opportunity for questions. And the chair will manage questions. So as in a normal meeting, either raise your hand physically or push the raise your hand button on Zoom to be able to be called on by the chair. I have been told several times that this is the best meeting of the year. Usually those are my staff members telling me that, though, so I'm not sure if I can trust that or not. So you'll have to decide for yourselves by the time we're done. So we'll start with the county board, and again, I'll just highlight some things there, but please feel free to ask other things. So revenue, no revenue, the county board generates. Expenditures, a couple things to highlight. Per diem payments, around $130,000 is budgeted for per diems. We're budgeting a little less, about $4,400 less than last year, based on sort of historical trends that we look at. We're also budgeting less for legal notices, $13,000, a decrease of, again, about $4,000, and that's because of our annual switch between the Janesville Gazette and the Beloit Daily News. The Daily News is a little less expensive based on its circulation. One cost increase in the county board account is for the dues we pay to the Wisconsin Counties Utility Tax Association, and because that's based on a percentage of our shared utility payments, because our utility payment has gone up this year due to the opening of the Alliant Energy plant. There's an increase, about a doubling of our dues, so we'll be paying a little over $6,000 next year. Overall, tax levy in the county board account is about $188,000. That's $4,600 less, about 2.4% less than the prior year. Does anybody have any questions about the county board account? If not, we'll move on to the Ag and Land Conservation Committees. We'll start with UW Extension. And here I will start sharing my screen to see if I can make this work. All right. There we go. So here's the comments for UW Extension if you want to follow along. Revenue, I wanted to highlight revenue from the farm account. Not everybody is aware about the revenue that we get from the county farm. So you'll see overall there's some revenue we get from leasing county farm land, about $97,000. We get revenue from garden plot rentals, research plot, crops that are sold. Overall, about $115,000, which is no change from the prior year. On the expenditure side, before that, I just wanted to highlight, as I always want to, the donations we get for the operation of the county farm. And you can see here on the screen the donations both in seed and just in-kind equipment donations from those partners. So we really appreciate that. Reduces our costs, adds to the value of the county farm. So thanks to the partners for that. On the expenditure side, contracted services, that line item represents our contract with UW Extension for the educator positions. We currently are budgeting $175,000 for those costs, which for those 4.2 FTE comes out to about $42,000 per position. And you can see in the budget the list of the positions that we currently fund and their FTE. Not a whole lot of change in UW Extension, so I won't dwell on that. Overall, if you see in the summary there, the tax levy, including the farm, $253,000, which is a decrease of $2,000, or just under 1% from the prior year. Any questions about UW Extension?
Josh, this is Supervisor Gustina.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell everybody how many acres the county actually has on that farm sitting out there?
That is a great question. I'm not sure I know the answer to it. Does anybody in the room happen to know that? I guess I'll look to some of the supervisors who may be aware.
I push my button. Want me to stand up? It is, I believe, 360 leased. I'd have to double check on that, but it's right in that neighborhood. There are more acres than that because there are land that the UW Crop Sciences uses for experimentation and education.
Oh, cool. So maybe around 400 acres or so?
Yes, just short of that, Wayne.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just seeing if I could pull it up real quick as well in their submissions. If you just hold on a second, I may be able to find the answer for you. Try not to dwell here, just. Yeah, I don't see it. All right.
Josh, this is Chrissy.
No, yeah, I'm not finding it. Oh, Chrissy, are you on? Did I hear you?
Yeah, I'd be happy to send out those numbers to the board if they're interested. I don't have them in front of me either, so I apologize, but I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions about UW Extension? If not, then we'll go on to land conservation. So here you can see we have federal aid budgeted $95,000, and that's our second year of our staffing grant, second of our 4-year grant. Groundwater nitrate project budget, $18,000 was budgeted in 2021. That's from some ATC funds that the county board set aside for that purpose several years ago. We still have $85,000 or so in that account dedicated to that purpose. For the PACE program, we expect to have another $200,000 in sales tax dedicated to PACE this year, as well as $256,000 in federal aid for 2 parcels, which has been typical over several years. We are having a reduction in revenue in the Yahara WINS program. Overall, we're going to have a decrease of a little over $200,000, which is about half of the funds we've had in prior years, just due to a change in the expectations for the amount of work that will be done. All right. One thing to note on expenditures is that we expect our clean sweep budget to decrease by about $5,000 over the prior year as we're trying to balance the amount of funds we use from those ATC funds for that program. And so we'll be looking to have our partner municipalities contribute to that again next year as well. The biggest change in land conservation is personnel related. So you'll see a parallel change in the planning department budget. So with the retirement of our 2 long-serving leaders in those 2 departments in 2020 gave us an opportunity to look at the organizational structure of both departments. So what we're recommending personnel-wise, and this is something that's already been through both of those committees for recommendation, is that we will have one department head who will oversee the two separate departments. So we'll still have a separate land conservation department, separate planning and development department, but we'll have one staff member who will be the department head over both. So we'll have a reclassification of the county conservationist, and the new title will be Director of Land Conservation Planning and Development. And that will be split 50-50 between land conservation, which you see in this budget, and planning, which we'll talk about later. In this budget, that change results in a net cost savings of just over $50,000. You also see a reallocation of one FTE senior conservation specialist, and that's to reflect more responsibilities to serve in a lead or acting director role at times. So you see an increase there. We also have a retitle of a different senior conservation specialist position to a conservation specialist 4 position. No change in wage there. And you have the creation of a conservation specialist 2 position that will cost just about $77,000. And the thought was, with the reduction really in the director's position to half time, needed some more resources in the land conservation department. And so the recommendation was to go with a conservation specialist 2, sort of a more of an entry kind of level position to shoulder some of the more duties of the department. So the recommendation for the tax levy is $252,000. That's an increase of about $77,000 or 44%, again, largely based on the personnel changes that you see there, as well as some of the other things I mentioned. Any questions about land conservation? If not, then we'll go on.
Davis has a question. On the non-metallic mining reclamation ordinance, are we considering any fee increases for the permits?
Let's see. I'm not sure if Andrew is on, or if the committee chair would like to address that. I don't remember highlighting that, but I can't tell you for sure unless I look here in the fees at the back of the. I guess the fees aren't here. I don't believe we're having any fee increases in those areas, Supervisor Davis.
Thank you. I was just curious because I know we'll be experiencing more of the non-metallic mining in the near future.
Yeah, if there's any change.
Yeah, this is Andrew.
Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the fees are based on a per acre basis. So as mine sites get bigger, their fees per site get larger. So and part of the fees that we collect go to the DNR for oversight. So that's been pretty constant over the last 14 or 15.
Andrew, you still there? I think we lost you. I think we lost Andrew for the moment, but I think you get the gist of the response there that he was going for with regard to the trend in the fees.
Yes, that makes sense to me. Thank you.
Any other land conservation related questions? If not, the Board of Health is next. I've pulled up the comments on the screen. A few things to know about the Board of Health. Of course, the Public Health Department has been very busy this year with our COVID-19 response, as have many of our departments been affected by it. But some of the things you'll see here, the fees in the Environmental Health Division will remain unchanged for 2020. And you can see the fee schedule is included in the binders or online. We're seeing several revenue sources that are decreasing in 2020 or in 2021 as compared to the prior year. You can see here that the two first ones listed, the influenza vaccine fees and the pneumonia vaccine fees, are a decrease in an ongoing trend where individuals are getting those services through their primary care physician and not through the health department anymore. and also then our general immunization fees, which is for our out-of-county travel clinic or out-of-country travel clinic, going down also by $45,000, which is just the fact that individuals aren't traveling out of the country as much. And so we expect those fees to go down next year as well. On the expenditure side, one of the impacts in the health department budget for next year will be its ongoing response costs. You can see telephone costs are up by about $28,000, an increase of just about $8,000 because of the need to work remotely and our staff to have more cell phones to be able to have contact during the pandemic response. We're adding a software package for electronic health records to help the health department manage its records better. There's a $25,000 increase, but that's going to be funded by a federal emergency preparedness grant, so no impact on the tax levy there. The next bullet talks about the costs for pandemic response. So at the time that we put the budget together, we took a guess at what we might get from the state and federal governments for things such as contact tracing, so what we kind of call our surge staffing in the health department. So you see the number here in the budget is just over 1.1 million. That's offset with expenditures of the same number in the budget, so no impact on the levy there. It is likely that that will end up being less, at least as far as what we're being told now, as far as estimates from the state. However, it is very hard to tell over the course of the year what kind of packages might come down from the federal or state governments to support the health department's response efforts. So at this point in time, we may leave that number in there given that it doesn't have any effect on the levy, but it is very likely to not end up being that number by the end of the year. You see in the next bullet, grant program funds offset administration costs, and because of just the ebb and flow of the grants that we receive, as well as the time that staff can devote to them, we get some costs to offset administrative costs. You can see that's going to be down by about $16,000 just due to the expiration of several grants next year. Personnel-wise, you will recall that the board created a 1.0 FTE public health communications specialist in 2020 with funding from a COVID grant. Overall, that cost annualized will be about $85,000. That grant, as you recall from the resolution, will expire mid-year. And so I am recommending that the funding for the remainder of the year be supported for about $42,000 with county funding. You'll note here the first time I've recommended that we use the utility aids to support that amount in 2021. And I won't necessarily always note that. You'll see it written in the budget book, but in the administrator's letter in the beginning of the budget book, you'll see where I've listed all of those expenses that I've at least assigned, as I talked about during the budget presentation, to the utility aids. Overall, the tax levy for the health department is just under 2.7 million. That's an increase of about $150,000 or a 6% increase. Any questions about the health department's budget? If not, then we'll move on to the County Board Staff Committee. We'll start with the County Administrator's budget. Several of the expenditures that you see here, telephone, office supplies, training, so forth, those are increasing based on the personnel actions that are recommended that we'll talk about shortly. The one thing I do always want to point out about the administrator's budget is that just under 98% of the costs are personnel related, and you can see we're adding to those in the recommended budget as well. Those include our allocation to the Human Resources Department for a portion of the Human Resources Secretary's time to back up Marilyn. Occasionally, we do let Marilyn go on a vacation, and so we need some support for her. Personnel requests in here for the board to consider. The first one is one of two equity manager positions that I've recommended in the budget. This position in the administrator's office would cost $98,000 in 2021. And you can see in my description here, my brief description, providing leadership in the county's diversity and inclusion efforts. Over the past number of years, the county has undertaken a significantly increased approach to trying to be involved in improving the workforce environment, make an inclusive environment, including increasing the diversity of our workforce, engaging with our community partners more, providing better services to our clients in an inclusive manner. And the reason I've included this position and really both positions in the budget this year, number one, I feel like we've really kind of reached a place where if we're going to advance these initiatives, we need some dedicated staff resources. Number two, given the resolutions that the county board passed earlier this year, committing the county to taking a number of specific actions related to equity. Again, I feel like if we're going to accomplish those, we're going to need some staff resources dedicated to that. And you can also reference the administrator's letter in the front of the budget that outlines those resolved clauses from those resolutions and more about this position. The other position is the communications manager position. That would cost $87,000 in this budget. There's, again, this is one thing I'd say is sort of lessons learned from the pandemic, as we've struggled a little bit, honestly, over time to have capacity for communications. This is something we've talked about. I've talked about with a number of you over the years about whether we should have a position like this. And as I note in the comments here, we've not done it, so we've not recommended it, not brought it to you for your consideration over the years, just because of the competing priorities, and it never sort of rose to the level of what we kind of referred to as a need. And there's several reasons why I think this is, has the potential to be of value to the county, not only media relations, getting information to the public more. I think the term that was used, you may have read the Gazette article, spokesperson was the term used, and certainly, there could be circumstances in which that position would help facilitate information to the media. But there are many other things that I would see this position have value in particular, social media presence. The county honestly has a pretty poor social media presence. There are departments that do a good job, but it's not coordinated. Fragmented is the word I have used before to describe it. And I think in the public that we're trying to reach these days, increasingly relies on social media. I think we've seen that this year more than ever, the role social media plays in communications. And I think we're missing out on reaching clients, folks that may need our services. We want to communicate with based on a lack of social media presence. And again, several other things in here I think that we could use this position for. As I said, haven't requested it before, felt given all those circumstances, now might be the time for the board to consider it. So again, I would, as with everything in the budget, I would leave that up to you to decide whether or not you feel that the time is right or that their priority exists for that position. Again, both those positions are highlighted in our utility aids revenue. Overall, tax levy in the administrator's office, $835,000. That's that 30% increase, $196,000 again, which is due largely to those two, almost entirely those two position increases. I imagine you may have some questions about that, so I'll pause there to see if you have any questions for me about the administrator's budget. Supervisor Wildy, I believe, has his hand raised.
Yeah, Josh, I was just question about the equity, I believe it's the advisor position. Now, the number that we're seeing there, that would account for like the annual pay and benefits combined, right?
Correct.
Do you have an estimate as to what the pay portion of that, the actual salary, would be?
Yes, I do. Give me a minute and we can see if somebody can find it here. I didn't bring my pay grids with me, but I think we can find it if you give me just a minute. Stop sharing my screen for a moment and dig this out. We're all racing, staff are all racing here to go into the files to see who can find it first.
I'm sorry. You could just send it to me too. I suppose it's too much.
That's all right. I think we've got it here.
This is Annette. I got it. Range 26 starts at $71,179.92, and that's using the 2020 budget figure.
Thank you, Annette.
Thank you, Annette. Thanks.
This is Supervisor Gastina. Could you please repeat that again?
Annette, can you repeat that number?
Yes, sorry, my page. $71,179.92, and that's using the 2020 unilateral pay grid. We don't have a 2021 one as of yet.
Okay, that's just strictly straight salary.
Yes, sir, that's the first step of the range.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome.
Other questions?
Supervisor Davis. I
Go
was
ahead, Supervisor
curious,
Davis.
do we have a program or do we have a concerted effort to do grant writing in all of the departments? Are there funds available for that, to send people to grant writing training?
So grant writing is something that is sort of done on an ad hoc basis, department by department. So we don't have any positions that you would call a grant writer in the county. We have positions that do grant writing. So for example, Elizabeth Pullman McQuillan in the administrator's office does a lot of grant writing in the justice area. Not certainly the biggest part of her job, but she does that. Human services staff writes grants frequently amongst a variety of staff. And there are many departments that apply for grants and do it sort of just based on the resources they have. I know some staff do go to grant training. I believe that that our clerk of courts just might have gone to a grant writing training due to some interest in some grants that we might be looking to get. So it is not coordinated centrally in the way that we have a grant writer. It does happen throughout the county.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Josh, I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead, Supervisor Schultz.
How was the salary range determined, and what sort of requirements go with that position?
Great question. So the salary range for any position, any new position, the county human resources will manage that process. So typically we'll do an evaluation of comparative counties, what other counties make, or what other counties pay for similar type positions. Sometimes there's not a whole lot to compare to. And so we have to look at the kinds of duties that a position might have, compare it to other positions that we have in the county that do similar kinds of work, and to sort of just come up with a number that we think is appropriate based on the duties that we've assigned. As far as what are the requirements for that position, I'm trying to see if I can find the position description that we had drafted. See if I can find it here real quick and pull it up for you. See if it has anything in it that might be helpful. Yeah, I'm not seeing it here real quick. Yeah, I think I'll have to follow up with you and get you the copy of the PD that we drafted that might have the requirements for that position in it.
All right, thank you.
So if nothing else, I'll move on while you're thinking more about that to Corporation Council. Corporation Council this year has very little changes. There's not much changing in their office operations. And so there's not really a whole lot to say functionally about what the department's operations are. So I'll just go right to the tax levy. Tax levy, $372,814. That's a decrease of just over $5,000 or 1.4% from the prior year. Certainly can answer any questions you have. Rich can answer questions as well. If not, we'll go on to human resources. So human resources, you can see the budget up on your screen now. A couple things to highlight. The other contracted services line, you can see a $30,000 decrease in that. That was funding that the county board included in the budget this year in 2020, to fund a consultant for the Blue Ribbon Commission on Organizational Excellence. Due to COVID and other factors, that committee has just started its meetings. So the funding will be carried over from 2020 to 2021, but we won't need to keep that funding in the base budget for next year. You can see a couple areas where expenditures are going down slightly here. Dues and subscriptions will go down a little bit. Recruitment expenses are going down as we're using more of online recruitments. Continuing to have the $20,000 that we've had for several years for our diversity and inclusion initiatives, which covers things like training. And you can see in the paragraph here a little description of how we have used some of those funds in the past. As far as other things, really personnel, a couple personnel changes. First of all, a retitle of a position right now that we call human resources analyst in the budget. Given the way that we have had an increase in analyst positions in the budget, the thought was to change that to be called human resources generalist, which is a common term in human resources departments, given that that position isn't really doing analysis per se in the way that we think about it now in our workforce. And then reclassification of human resources employee benefits specialist to become a human resources generalist. You can see the cost of that change next year will be $239. Based on the way that we've changed our health plan, we don't need that position to do as much. With our health insurance plan, that position is already doing about half their time on recruitments, particularly at Rock Haven, so they're working out of class already, and so we probably need to fix that and put them in the right pay range for the work that they're doing. Overall tax levy in HR, $653,000. That's a decrease of just over $7,000 or 1.1%. Any questions about the human resources budget? Oh, okay. All right, so it sounds like we don't have any more questions. Anything else on County Board Staff Committee departments before we move on? All right. Looks like Sheriff Knutson has rejoined us to make his announcement. Sheriff, do you want to go ahead?
Hear me now? Coming through it all on
It's a first. So Sheriff's still having troubles. Phone connect automated. We can see. So Sheriff's having phone issues.
We better get some new cell towers out in his area.
If somebody could send him a participant ID, I think he could get in and talk if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Craig,
Chief.
does he have access to his county email?
I believe he would on his phone. He should have his email, so we get him that. I struggled greatly too, and I think he sent me his link. And So if I look like Craig, that's fine, but I might be signed in as Troy. I don't really know this technology thing. I had to get the 20-year-old in here to get this done for me. I'm gonna hit this mute thing again, so the background noise goes away.
All right, thanks, Chief. So we'll try to get Sheriff. We'll try to get you hooked up. We'll take another pause here, and if nothing else, by the time we get to your department's budget, we'll hope to have you hooked up again. And if not,
And I
we'll call
hope
the
he's
chief
hooked
to-
up by then, so I don't have to answer a lot of questions, because that'd be really nice if the sheriff answered them for me, because he's that good of a guy. He really is.
So Chief Deputy Strauss, message to all of the county board members is please start making your list of questions for the sheriff. You have a little bit of time here before we get to his budget. So we'll come back to the sheriff and we'll discuss that later. In the meantime, we'll go on to the Education, Veterans, and Aging Services Committee, and I'll reshare my screen. So we'll start with the Council on Aging. Several things going on in the Council on Aging budget this year. The Council on Aging has been affected significantly by COVID. When you think about the things they do, such as their transit program, meal programs, even their health prevention programs are all things that have been hard to do because most of those things are in person. So that's been a challenge for them. On the good side, they've gotten a fair amount of federal funding for the meal programs, which has been very helpful. We've transitioned in 2020, given COVID, to not having congregate meals, but having the home delivered meals. So even folks who typically would participate congregate have gone to home delivered this year. And so you can see some of the changes on the screen in front of you. So for 2021, we're expecting this trend to continue for the foreseeable future as COVID is still among us. So revenue from the congregate program will decrease by $78,000. We're going to dedicate some fund balance to that program as well next year. Home delivered, you can see that we've gotten some federal monies for that as well. Fortunately, we're allowed to carry some of those over till next year. So you can see that so our own funding is down for the meal programs because we've gotten some of this federal revenue next year as well. So the transit program, again, changes for that this year. We've ramped up our schedule again, and we're hoping next year to continue to be able to ramp that up and continue to provide that service at greater levels and levels closer to normal. A couple things to note here. We'll have some fees and some revenue that will increase by just about $40,000 due to some ridership changes in one of our programs. Paratransit ridership, we're expecting to decrease a little bit. We do have a new multi-year contract with the cities of Beloit and Janesville to provide paratransit services for them. We do have a 20% local match, including for purchasing transit vehicles, and that's going to increase by about $16,000. Overall, we have a fund balance for specialized transit that is going to be about $236,000. We use that from year to year to help offset some of the costs of our transit program, and particularly our van purchases. On the expenditure side, we talked at your last meeting about the creation of county positions to be drivers for the transit program. And you can see that described here again. As a reminder, the resolution that you approved created 11.2 FTE, increased budgeted program costs overall by about $148,000. Also note here, and you can see this in several budgets, so I won't mention it each time, but we changed the way we budgeted for health insurance this year and distributed those funds differently among the departments. Some departments, like the Council on Aging, for example, are a casualty, if you would, of that change, where more health insurance costs are going to be budgeted in their departments. And so some of our increased costs for the transit drivers are also due to that way that we're budgeting next year. You can see we've got 2 vehicles that we're budgeting to replace next year at a cost of just under $150,000. Our 20% match of that is just about $30,000. You can see here some of the cost implications. I talked about the revenue side for the congregate program, where you can see our program costs are going to be down by about $94,000 overall due to not anticipating having those congregate sites open up necessarily, not knowing when that will be next year. And you can see here some costs for home delivered programs as well. Also like to point out that Beloit Meals on Wheels program, again, $47,000. Same amount that budgeted last year. Remember last year there was the increase to Beloit Meals on Wheels. So overall, just looking down at the levy implications for the Council on Aging, you can see an increase in the main account of about $29,000, which is due both to some of the health insurance changes and just the allocations, administrative allocations. So there were several of the other programs changing. And then you can see some of the other changes as far as the transportation program, increased cost there that we noted, mostly for the transit drivers. We won't have levy in the congregate and home delivered meal programs this year, given the increase in the federal resources we have for that, which some of which is shown in our fund balance. So overall, levy for the Council on Aging programs, $288,000. That's an increase of about $70,000. So that's a pretty significant 30% increase going into next year. Any questions for the Council on Aging?
Davis has a question.
Go ahead, Supervisor Davis.
I was curious about the transit, if it's covered through WMIC as far as liability for issues.
Good question. I don't know if Rich or Terry or Randy are around that would want to answer that question, but they probably can answer it better than I could.
I can take that question. Josh, this is Terry.
Go ahead, Terry.
Yes, it is covered. Our property and casualty and liability is covered under WMIC. So it still was, whenever we had an accident or a fender bender with the transit program previously, WMIC covered that as well.
Thank you.
Any other Council on Aging related questions? If not, Veteran Service Office is next. Oh, I guess I should say Council on Aging. One thing I'll mention as well under ADRC. Maybe remember we had an ad hoc committee to look at integration of Council on Aging and ADRC. There's nothing in the 2021 budget for integration, but there's going to be a resolution coming through for the county board to consider taking action on integration soon. There's been discussions at the various committees in the last several weeks about that. So nothing in the budget related integration, but we will be discussing that at the board here probably over the next couple of months. Veteran Service Office, just a reminder that several years ago, the state went back to the flat $13,000 block grant for the CVSO. So that's one of the main sources of revenue for operations. Donations are down due to COVID. So you can see here, we usually budget about $6,500 donations, and we've hardly received anything in 2020. Just haven't had as many events where fundraisers can occur, as you can imagine. So we're hoping that'll go up again. We've put the revenue back in. It's kind of offset with expenditures, so there's no real effect on the levy by having that in there. And we do have a fund balance of just under $20,000 in the donation account. We also have a veterans relief account that can be used for very specific purposes for veterans. And you can see here that also has been down, not as much usage in 2020. With the economy, unknowns in the economy, we kind of have an expectation that may be more need next year. So typically, we budgeted just over $4,700 in 2020. We only anticipate using just over $1,000. So instead of putting another $4,700 into it, I'm recommending $3,700 those unused funds do go into a fund balance as well. And so we do have about $8,500 left in that fund balance. So if there are needs beyond what is currently budgeted, it would be easy for the county board to just appropriate some of those funds out of the fund balance going into next year. One other thing to note: training account increasing by $1,000. The National Association conference is going to be in Madison next year, so putting a little more in here to be able to send staff when it's local. Overall levy for the VSO, $307,000. That's a decrease of about $6,700 or 2% from the prior year. Any questions on the Veteran Service Office? If nothing on the Veteran Service Office, then we'll check back in with the sheriff to see if he has now made it through. On your phone. Sheriff Knutson, are you on your phone?
I am. Can you copy me now?
Oh, we hear you.
Still no?
Loud and clear, Sheriff. Go ahead.
How about? Well, that's great. The announcement that I wanted to make earlier was
leave us hanging, Sheriff.
we would probably find out in October whether we got that grant or not. We did find out last night that we had not received that grant. So that's a little bit disappointing for us. At the same time, back when we applied for that grant, we kind of applied for it in kind of a bare bones manner, almost a pilot program sort of approach to our needs for body cameras. And, you know, with the events of the summer, I think that we're probably in need of a more full implementation of that sort of thing. So right now we're working on what options we have that way and what might be a better implementation of that. And I'll probably be bringing that back to the board sometime in the near future here.
Thanks, Sheriff. Appreciate you getting through to make that announcement. And if the board has questions about the sheriff's budget and it relates to maybe how that will work, you certainly can reference that maybe during the sheriff's budget when we get there, instead of having any questions right now.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks, Sheriff. All right, so we'll move on to the Finance Committee next. Finance Department is the first department up. I will share my screen again. From an operational standpoint, not a whole lot of changes in the finance department's budget. You can see here just a few minor notes about the cost allocations and training and so forth. Actually two changes really to note here, personnel related. Number one, a reallocation or a reclassification request from a position that we call union accountant in the 2489 pay grid to a unilateral accountant. The cost of that is $5,664 in 2021. This is a kind of a change we've made over the last several years in budgets as our accountant staff end up taking on more responsibilities. Then we typically move them into different positions, and so this is no different. So that is one request that I'm recommending. The second one is the creation of a 0.4 FTE payroll specialist position. That position will cost $34,000 in 2021. Many of you may not remember what we did in the previous budget, but what we did in 2020 is we eliminated a full-time payroll staff position that was at Rockhaven when we had a retirement, and we created a 0.4 position in finance to take on those duties, anticipating that maybe we could find some efficiencies in the sharing of duties if those duties were centralized in finance. What we found out over the course of this year was that several other finance staff were having to devote their time to doing payroll at Rockhaven. So what we're asking here is we kind of figured out maybe a more right-sized approach, another 0.4 position part-time to help with those duties, allow the other finance staff to go back to some of their other duties as well. So overall, the finance department's recommended levy just over $1 million, increase of $15,000 or 1.5%. Any questions about the finance budget? If not, we'll move on to information technology. So you'll probably remember over the last couple of years, we've had quite a bit of change in the IT department's budget. Much of that has come through the reorganization that's occurred. We've added and eliminated, changed several staff positions to try to get the positions that we feel we need going forward. Some of that has come, much of it actually has come through the 2 reports that we've had from Baker Tilly. And we've reached a point where we've implemented most, if not all, of those recommendations. So we continue to move forward, and this budget is no different with changes in the department. So you can see in the budget here on the page about revenue. One thing I wanted to highlight is a reminder that IT is what we call an internal service fund. So what that means is unspent funds from year to year accumulate in the department's fund balance, which only can be used for IT. So we have occasionally appropriated funding from their fund balance to offset one-time costs. So you can see that they currently have a fund balance of just over $2 million. So I've recommended $240,000 to be used for some specific purposes. I'll talk about those in a second. That's just under $300,000 less fund balance that we used in the 2020 budget. So a reduction in the use of fund balance. Here on your screen now is the one-time costs. A couple of them are related to contracts. So one, the first $75,000 one, helping to implement efforts to help with a mobile county workforce. You can see the things there that will help us manage our mobile workforce better. $75,000 for deployment of new and replacement laptops. You remember that the county board approved the purchase of many laptops to help our county workforce work remotely. Some of those are going to be reimbursed by the federal CARES money. Specifically, remote workforce is one of the purposes of the CARES grant. And so we need to deploy all those laptops that are coming in. And so to help with that and to get those laptops out, we're going to contract with a third party to help us do that. We have $20,000 for consulting services for the move of the data center. We'll talk about that project later under the facilities management budget. We also have $70,000 budgeted for several what we call third-party assessments. Here you can see backup storage, our Citrix system, which is our remote access system, HIPAA, endpoint management, and our audiovisual equipment, infrastructure and support. The reason that we're taking this approach here, I think, is we found quite a bit of success in the Baker Tilly contracts to bring in a third party to kind of evaluate where we are in these areas. And so we thought it made some sense to use some of one-time funds for continuing assessments like that. You can see we've got a number of capital projects funded by sales tax. So here, $361,000 in sales tax for these projects, $165,000 for server replacement at the courthouse. If you have questions about what a hyperconverged server is, I'll refer you to our IT staff that are on the call. We also have the one-time costs associated with what we're kind of calling our public-facing communications infrastructure. So there's just about $66,000 in one-time costs associated with this, which includes things like our agenda management software and the public interface, new county board voting system, cameras that are going to be installed for streaming county board meetings when we're all back in this room, and then the third-party design and managed county website. Annual costs are going to be about $46,000. That'll be a levy-funded cost, but the one-time implementation costs here will come from sales tax. And you can see several other things here: security system software, some server replacements, and a couple different types of licenses. Also, one-time cost of $4,000 for an emergency notification system, and there's an annual cost of $33,000 that will be levy-funded there as well. Personnel wise, we still have some personnel changes we're doing this year, though. Really only one new personnel change, something that we're calling the Cloud Services Coordinator, as we implement our IT strategy of putting more of our systems and data in the cloud. Having a position that is trained in how to manage and coordinate our cloud services is something that we see as a priority. We're going to start that process really next year. And so by mid-year, we expect to need this staff resource. So I'm recommending as of July 1 that we have this position in place. The cost of that, $49,000, is the fully loaded half-year cost of that. Overall for IT, recommended levy is just about $2.6 million, an increase of $492,000, which is just about a 24% increase compared to the prior year. I would note that some of that increase, if not a good deal of it, is personnel related. Given the change in the staff we've hired staff at some higher pay ranges to have some higher technical skills. And so as they start to work their way through our pay grids, we'll see increases in staff costs in the budget at least for the next several years. Any questions related to IT that we can answer? If not, next we'll move to the county clerk's budget. So there are typical changes in the clerk's budget from year to year that are based on the election cycle, and you see those here as well. But you're also seeing changes in the clerk's budget that are related to COVID, really, and some of the changes that the clerk hasn't been able to do as much of certain kinds of things as she has in the past. So for example, you'll see there's a slight change in marriage license fees. You'll see there's a general fees account. If you're looking at the budget, and that includes a number of things that I've listed here. Most notably, though, passport photos. So again, as we have less out-of-country travel, we've had a significant decrease in passport photo fees. So recommending, anticipating $9,000 less in this account. The passport fees themselves also expected to decrease by $35,000. Again, anticipating less travel that we've already started to experience this year. So that's a significant decrease in our revenue in the clerk's budget. You can see election revenue here in a couple different areas, also down the normal cycle, going from fewer elections next year. So you can see that, as well as a decrease in voter registration services we provide to municipalities who took that on this year during the pandemic to give the clerk more time. And they found out that they could do it and liked it. And so we anticipate a base reduction in revenue for that going forward. Along with the revenue decreases, though, are some decreases in costs for things related to passport postage, for example. You see that there. Most notably, though, elections. We see a decrease in our ballot costs, about $80,000 decrease in ballot costs as an example, as well as legal notices. We do have some equipment that we need in the clerk's office, and you can see here we're budgeting $35,000 for an update to election equipment, which I think we all agree. Election security and having updated equipment is very important. So overall, the levy in the clerk's main account, $132,000. That's an increase of about $37,000 or 40%. In the elections account, $93,000. That's a decrease of about $11,000. So overall, the clerk's levy is $226,000, which is about a $26,000 increase over the prior year. Are there any questions that Lisa or I can answer for you about the county clerk's budget? Not much change in the treasurer's budget. The largest change here to note, though, is pretty significant. So change in the treasurer's budget really is related to interest and penalties. I mentioned this during the budget presentation. So you can see the interest and penalties on delinquent taxes is not changing. That's a pretty big number there. You can see that $1.4 million number. Interest on investments is really the one that's changing So you can see that in 2021, we're anticipating interest revenue of $1.8 million, which is still significant sum, but is about $434,000 less, or about 20% less than we had budgeted in 2020. So that, again, how that works is that revenue is used to offset costs elsewhere in the county budget. And so when you think about that decrease in revenue in the treasurer's budget, that is sort of like a hole that is created right off the bat when we're looking at the budget for the next year that we have to fill in other ways. One increase we do anticipate next year is increase in a $40,000 increase in what we budget for sale of tax delinquent properties. And that's because in 2020, we postponed the sale and the foreclosure process due to the pandemic. And so we'll have essentially a double year potentially next year, assuming that happens next year as well. Overall, the budget contains just over $3 million of revenue in excess of expenditures. That overall in the budget, when you consider all the revenue and expenditure items, is $364,000, about a 10% less amount that can go to offset county costs in other areas. Questions about the treasurer's budget? Next is the Register of Deeds. So one of the bright spots in 2020, I would say, is the Register of Deeds budget, which was that we didn't actually see revenue from housing go down as we might have anticipated due to the pandemic and the economy. And actually, housing was strong in 2020. And so when you see the 2020 budget, you'll see that we continue to expect a strong housing market based on what we experienced this year. So you can see real estate transfer fee is remaining the same. The real estate registry, we're actually budgeting an increase of about $17,000 in that revenue stream. One thing to remind you all of, for several years, we've had the redaction project in the Register of Deeds budget, where those funds that were gathered between 2010 and 2014 continue to sit in a fund balance in the Register of Deeds office every year. We appropriate some of that for our contract with Fiddler to complete the redaction of Social Security numbers from old real estate records. So the question has come up before about, when does that end? And as long as we have that fund balance, we'll continue to work through them. So it doesn't end any particular year, only once we've worked through the project and completed it. So we appropriate funds every year to use for that. Whatever we don't spend goes back to the fund balance. We reappropriate it the next year and continue to work through that. So as you can see here, fund balance getting down. We'll expect to have about $70,000 less in the account, and so again, getting to the end of that project here soon, at least into the fees to be able to manage that. Personnel-wise, one thing to point out, there has been a vacant Register of Deeds specialist, and Sandy's kept that vacant and tried to manage that without filling it. What we've done in the budget is left that position on the books, so to speak, put some more money in for some seasonal wages and overtime wages, as she's going to try to manage that without necessarily filling the full-time position to save some money. So appreciate flexibility. Sandy is displaying here to try to save the county some money, but we left it on to provide her flexibility in case she needs to fill the position, whether on a part-time basis even, just to continue to operate. Overall, in the Register of Deeds budget, the budget contains $426,000 revenue in excess of expenditures, like the treasurer's budget. That also offsets property tax levy and other county costs, and actually is an increase, unlike the treasurer's budget is an increase from the prior year. Any questions on the Register of Deeds budget? In the back of the Finance Committee section is the community agency initiatives. You may recall that several years ago, the staff committee established community agency initiatives policy to sort of formalize and create organization around what historically had been the county board's contributions to nonprofit organizations. So we organized them here into this one section of the budget. policy is that these are primarily to be funded with tax levy. And so I'll run through these. Many of these are the same organizations that we funded in the last couple of years. I'll update you on the numbers. So HealthNet, I list first here. You may recall that we contracted with HealthNet a couple of years ago. They provide services to both the Sheriff's Office and Human Services Department, dental services, inmates at the jail, some medications for reentry, some for uninsured county clients. You can see we have a contract of $57,000 here. So the contract that the county board directed us to have with HealthNet was a flat fee. We do get reports from HealthNet about the number of clients they have served. And I've had discussions with Ian Hedges, their director, about those ramping up those services. And again, HealthNet is continually working to try to increase the numbers of county, whether it's inmates or human services clients that we provide services to. RSVP is next. There's two different programs we fund for RSVP, the Intergenerational Program and Seniors Volunteering for Seniors, and you can see those amounts are the same as in 2020. The YWCA of Rock County also has two programs. Care House, we provide $10,000 to, same as 2020. There was a request for additional funds for the domestic violence shelter. So the request was to increase the $10,000 that we've provided historically to $50,000 due to the pandemic. Shelter's been able to secure volunteers, which it usually uses for the evening overnight shifts. They've had to pay staff and others to do that. And so anticipating the ongoing one-time costs for the pandemic, recommending $40,000 just as a one-time funding increase to help get them through that struggle. Family services, we also funded domestic violence shelter and $10,000 is intended to go to family services, which was the same as the prior year. CASA, we've funded for many years now. There was a request from CASA for $30,000, which would have been an increase of $20,000 over what was provided in 2020. I'm recommending that we increase it from $10,000 to $20,000, twice what was provided in 2020. CASA intends to use the additional funding to increase the number of children for whom it can provide services, and they're hoping to attract some volunteers, some volunteers that reflect the diversity of the clients they serve, which is certainly a goal that the county would agree with. Heritage Rock County, also been funded for many years. Heritage Rock County, which is a consortium of all the historical societies in the county, has requested $27,546, which is a $5,000 increase over 2020. Like many of the nonprofits, they're struggling by not being able to generate revenue that they usually would due to the pandemic. So again, I'm recommending a one-time cost of $5,000, a one-time increase to assist for pandemic-related purposes. Tourism councils requesting and recommended the same $5,500. The Fair Board, we've provided $1,500 annually for the publication of the 4-H Fair booklet. They're requesting $10,000 in 2021. Again, this would be a COVID-related expenditure due to the decrease in revenue from not being able to have the fair this year. So I'm recommending an $8,500 one-time increase, again, to help them offset the cost of the pandemic. The one new nonprofit that I'm recommending we provide funding to in 2021 is In Touch Outreach. $5,000 is recommended. In Touch Outreach is a social service agency that provides several different kinds of services in the community. And you can see I've listed a number of them here. Is an organization that provides services consistent with the county board's goal of addressing social justice issues. So I am recommending this $5,000 again as a one-time grant, sort of to help the organization build capacity for any number of areas that it's trying to ramp up its services in this time. So I'll stop there on the community initiatives. In the community initiatives, and see if anybody has any questions. If not, we'll go on to the General Services Committee and discuss the facilities management budget. A couple important items to note about revenue in the facilities management budget as it relates to funds we use to offset our costs for maintaining the jail. We expect a change in 2021 with how the Sheriff's Office is going to manage its contract for inmate and public telephone charges. That's not completed yet, so we don't exactly know, but we anticipate a reduction as there'll be a change in how inmates are charged for using the phones. It's possible the $25,000 reduction is not exactly the right number, but without knowing what it was, we wanted to reduce a little bit to knowing that it would go down, but not necessarily knowing how much. So that is a change that I think not only is important for the inmates, but I think is consistent with some of the goals that we have as a county to try to make the contact between inmates and their families easier and less impactful on them as we try to think of ways to improve the integration of inmates back into the community. We all know that they're not there for very long locally, and so to the extent we can keep them anchored to some of their social and family ties, that's helpful. So that's one step that the sheriff and his team are taking to do that. Another $25,000 reduction is in jail assessment fees, which again is a court cost that comes through to help fund, and that's just a reduction based on what we're seeing as historical trends. Also note here, just a reminder that 2020 was the first full year of the sheriff's staff running the security station in front of the courthouse. So you can see in the facilities management budget, annualized, that's a $73,000 reduction to the facilities management budget. You'll see a cost of cleaning contracts we expect to go up next year. They've gone up this year as we've been paying our vendor to do more COVID-related cleaning throughout the county. And so you can see we've budgeted for a 10% increase going into next year. There's one personnel action requested to reclassify one crew leader to be called the Rockhaven crew leader. And that's a cost of about $1,500. There is a higher level of sort of regulations to run nursing homes. And so this recognizes that position being on par with the airport crew leader for specialized technical knowledge. The budget in front of you lists variety of capital projects. I would note again that as you see these capital projects, many of these capital projects, particularly the large ones in the budget over the next several years, those are due to the facilities master plan that was approved by the board in 2019. We continue to work through that and implement projects. And so many of those costs are outlined from that document several years ago. Most of the projects that you see here are funded through sales tax. We use debt financing on the larger projects on those as well. Overall, in 2021, we expect debt financing to fund about $17.9 million of three major projects that we'll talk about in a minute. Sales tax, we've got just about $2.6 million of sales tax for one-time capital projects in this budget as well. So I won't talk about each of these projects. I will highlight just a couple of them because they're larger ones. So for example, on the jail capital improvement account, we've got the $4.36 million engineering for the Pinehurst replacement building. That is one of the things for which we anticipate borrowing. The larger Pinehurst replacement project should be in a future year's budget, possibly even next year's budget, depending on when we can start construction. So this project is really just for the engineering and design work for that project. Other things to highlight, if you look over at the courthouse capital improvement project, several things going on in the courthouse next year that are similar. The $974,000 for the renovation of the district attorney's office. That is something we had in the 2020 budget. That was one of those items that was removed from sales tax funding early in the pandemic, as we were concerned that we wouldn't be generating sufficient sales tax revenue to fund that. So we put it back in to be funded with sales tax in 2021. And just to clarify about that project, that would be sort of reorganizing how one accesses the district attorney's office to make the workflow better, keep the public out of the DA's private workspaces, and add some space that we've been trying to move staff around in various offices that are adjacent up there for a couple years, so that when this project is done, when you come off those elevators, you'll see a new entrance to the district attorney's office that is more easily accessible and visible, so people will be able to find their way into the office easier when they'll then come in and see the staff to greet them. Renovating the law library. So the law library, which of course for those that are in the county boardroom or have been here before, is right behind the county boardroom. One of the projects during the pandemic is that court staff cleared out the old law books. We haven't actually ordered physical law books for many years, and yet we maintain the law library in the courthouse. And so one of the projects that they did was clear that out. We're gonna budget to renovate that and turn that into another meeting room / hearing room for the courts as they kind of struggle with space in the courthouse during the pandemic here. That would also be useful to have more space to spread out. Doing something similar in the probate storage space. So the probate office has a vault where they keep files. That was also cleared out this year when staff had extra time. So we'll be able to renovate that as well and turn it into a hearing room and a meeting room. So a couple things I just wanted to highlight in the courthouse there. The Youth Services Center, you can see some expenditures, in particular the camera system upgrade. Our camera system is antiquated and needs to be upgraded. If we don't do that project, we're likely to get some citations from the state for not being able to monitor the clients we have there. On your left, you see 1717 Center Avenue, the $2 million there, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. This is sort of the last expenditure to budget for that project, and that is, again, something that would be borrowed as part of that project. The reason that's separate is that we pulled it out of the project budget. It could have been in the project budget as well, but we pulled it out because we can save money by making those direct purchases and not having our contractors mark them up. And so these would be things to fill out the inside of that large building. One thing too to note, and you see at the bottom, Public Health and Council on Aging, that those are of course in the same building. We've got some security improvements that we've been working through over time throughout county facilities, card readers, for example. And we've also got some additional improvements on the Council on Aging side as we plan for Council on Aging move to 1717 and potentially anticipate moving the medical examiner's office into that. We need some renovations to make that work for them. So continue to have those conversations about whether the ME's office will fit into that space. No significant projects at the fairgrounds this year. You can see some what we call more maintenance projects, roof replacements, electrical work, carry over some money that was budgeted this year for more Blackhawk or blacktop work, and a gate on the front of the entrance there. The other big project you see is the IT 911 project, $11.5 million worth of borrowing. This is another project that's necessary to get our staff out of the healthcare center, like the 1717 project and the Pinehurst replacement project. Ultimately, we need to get everyone out of that building, and this is the project that will get IT staff out of there. Two things to note about that: not only the IT staff, but the data center, which is currently on the 5th floor of the healthcare center, needs to migrate. That's a pretty significant cost for that equipment to either be replaced or moved. You can imagine the fiber needs to be connected to this new location, and just a lot of effort involved to plan for that. And so that probably will be a next couple of year project to get that done. But we've coordinated that in that sort of new building adjacent to the 911 center, so that during that same project we can coordinate the replacement of the 911 furniture and equipment that gets used 24/7 for many years, and just time to replace that. So by having those two projects together, we feel we can more flexibly get both of those things done. It made sense to have that be, given the IT infrastructure needed for 911, to have the new data center attached there as well. So I won't go through the details here because I've explained much of this already. But get to the end, tax levy for facilities management, just under $2.6 million. That's a decrease of almost $260,000 from budget to budget. Do we have any questions on any of the capital projects or facilities management? Supervisor Sweeney?
Thank you, Josh. The satellite 911 center, is that in good shape, or does that need some attention as well?
So there's a couple things this year that happened with regard to the satellite 911 center. So our backup center is currently in the town of Beloit at their fire station. And we've used equipment, repurposed equipment from the main center over the years down there to make that work. The couple things we had to do this year. Number one, we used some of our CARES money to buy laptops, what we call our VPN laptops, so that we can answer calls from anywhere. Because one of the issues that actually happened this year was that we couldn't go to the backup site because of the fact that our fire department partners in the town of Beloit were the ones that were maybe most affected. We couldn't risk having our telecommunicators there. So we ended up, as you may remember, redeploying over to the highway shop, to a conference room we had staff set up there for a while. So as far as the needs of the backup site, I think we're in fairly good shape, especially now that we have those VPN laptops for every station there. Gives us much more flexibility to work out of the backup site or somewhere else if we need to. But I think the backup site right now is in good shape as far as its infrastructure and ability to be a response site. Other facility related questions? If not, next is Health Services Committee, and we'll talk about the Rock Haven budget. So talk about another department that's been significantly affected by COVID-19 has been Rock Haven. I'm sure that all of you have been trying to pay attention to what you at least read in the media about infections, COVID infections at our local nursing homes, including at Rock Haven. And so we've continued to have cycles of infections. Overall, I would say we've been more fortunate than other skilled nursing facilities, but we still continue to address those issues. One of the consequences from a budget perspective has been that in 2020, we froze admissions. And so our revenue streams in 2020 were significantly down. We're hoping that they're going back up again. We're again admitting residents. We've learned a lot about how to safely run the place, including trying to get family members in soon, hopefully to be able to visit their loved ones. But you can see here some of our assumptions about next year. We're sort of budgeting, anticipating a return to a more normal census in 2021. You can see here we've got several different payment sources which affect really the revenue stream. Medicaid, as a reminder, Medicaid really only reimburses us for about 43% of our costs. So much of the levy is due to that shortfall. Medicare reimburses higher because it's based on acuity rates, and we have higher acuity Medicare funded residents. Expect $2.5 million as we have expect a lower number of Medicare residents next year as compared to the higher number of Medicaid residents that we expect next year. Our private pay rate has not increased since 2019. It will remain at $311. That was another fee this year that we felt, given everything going on, to leave the same. And so we'll continue to look at that in future years. We expect private pay revenue about $3.35 million, increase of about $240,000 as we expect to have more private pay residents going forward. You can see here on the next page where we outline sort of what the year holds for us both in 2020 and 2021 as far as census goes. In 2021, just to jump to that, you can see we have differences there in the Medicaid, private pay, and Medicare residents that we are budgeting for. Intergovernmental transfer revenue is going to be down next year a little bit. You can see what that is. It's a payment from the state and federal governments to try to cover some of our Medicaid losses. Fund balance, another department that has its own fund balance. In the past couple of years, we've used fund balance to offset operational costs. In 2021, not recommending any fund balance for operations. We still expect to have about $1.8 million in the Rock Haven fund balance at the end of this year. Expenditures, really just from a expenditure standpoint, operational budget, not a whole lot to talk about. Some capital purchases, the biggest one being budgeting for a replacement nurse call system. So that's $250,000. The cost, our old system is 2013. And like the camera system at the Youth Services Center, this is something that unless we can get a new system, we're running afoul of nursing home regulations for the ability to respond to residents when they have issues. That'll also require us to put some more wireless access points in there so that our that call system will work well, and then just some ice machines and bins for some additional costs. Some of the changes, more significant changes that you'll see at Rock Haven is related to personnel. So some of these changes begin to try to align our resources with the clinical and administrative needs. And so the changes you see below are levy neutral. So we're changing some positions, adding some, deleting others, but overall they remain levy neutral. One change to note, if you can see the screen, you've got your budget book in front of you in the second bullet. You can see a deletion of a 0.7 FTE nursing supervisor and the creation of a 1.0 FTE infection preventionist position. That is an error, miscommunication error that made it into the final book here. What actually is included dollar-wise in the budget is that we still have this 1.0 FTE infection preventionist position that I've noted, but the 0.7 FTE nursing supervisor essentially becomes a different nursing position that's going to focus on our behavioral health program. And so that's not a deletion. The Health Services Committee has taken action to remedy that. And so when we get here on the 10th, you'll see that motion come in front of you to fix that error in the personnel description. Recommended is deletion of one environmental service worker that's currently vacant. The next one is deletion of the nurse practitioner position. As I see in the comments here, it was created in 2018. It was really part of a joint effort in the way that we were trying to join that to the medical director position to take some of the on-call and rounding off the medical director that was intended to reduce some of the medical director costs. The cost savings didn't occur because the medical director sort of maintained that same role. So this adjustment is being recommended, requested and recommended. Overall, part of a new approach that we're trying to take with regard to medical and on-call services in the facility. Other changes that are related, this kind of package of how we're looking to change our nursing organizational structure. So currently we have 4 ADONs, Assistant Director of Nursing positions. Several years ago, under the prior administrator, that was created to dedicate 1 ADON to each of the 4 households, units in Rock Haven Wings, if you will. What this recommendation would do is to delete 3 of those positions. So we'd have 1 ADON left and create with those FTE 2 nurse manager positions. Those nurse managers then would each be responsible for 2 of the wings. I think what we've found, as I note here, is that despite the best of intents of putting more resources into that, very possibly having only 2 and not 4 individuals responsible for those wings will lead to maybe some more consistency and continuity in the sort of oversight of the functions there. And you see what that reorganized nursing unit would look like. Also then repurposing an FTE to create an assistant nursing home administrator position. This is intended, as you can see here in my comments, to address really terms that I used here, like oversight, regulatory compliance, survey readiness. Again, just providing another resource to the sort of regulatory oversight to try to improve things like our survey results, our star ratings, things like that. And so, to continue to provide backup support for the nursing home administrator. Overall, levy for Rock Haven is just under 4.2 million. That's an increase of about $26,000 or under 1%. Are there any questions about the Rock Haven recommendations that I can provide?
Question.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I've been getting a lot of correspondence concerning eliminating the nurse practitioner. Their concern is that the medical director is not on site where the nurse practitioner is, and they can take care of problems a lot quicker than having to go through the the other direction.
Right. Yes, right. So there's been some discussion about the nurse practitioner position and the recommendation here, and I think that really gets into, what is the appropriate role. As I said, the medical director and the nurse practitioner were kind of joined together in that initial budget when it was approved to add that position. The way I would think about it is really sort of service delivery model in a way. The facility is looking to move to a different model of medical oversight services, looking to partner with our health systems to maybe bring in overall what would end up being more robust services by having not just one medical director, but certainly a medical director assigned, but more resources from the health system to bear. I think that one of the things to keep in mind about medical director models is that the models these days are less about having the medical director serve in a primary care physician role, which certainly happens now and certainly could continue to happen, but more in a coordinator of medical care and not so much a primary care physician role that is somebody on site regularly. Likewise, nurse practitioner position would not really be intended to serve in that medical director role or a physician role, but would really be doing things that nursing staff could do. Not to say that a nurse practitioner certainly has more authority and ability to do things that a nurse cannot do, but when you think about a skilled nursing facility and the kinds of things that we should be doing out there, those are kind of nursing functions, and the medical director function really being focused on things like clinical guidance and oversight of the policies for resident care, helping to identify and evaluate at a higher level clinical concerns, medical concerns that affect resident care, not so much providing direct care themselves. So I don't know if that necessarily addresses the concerns, but I think that's the best way I can answer the question about why the changes are recommended. That it's really more about a change in an approach and model that I think is a little more kind of a more typical contemporary approach. Focusing those medical services on quality improvement, and looking at those resources more proactively to address issues that arise, and not being sort of reactive as residents are having issues. To have the doctor be there to go on the floor to address those. Certainly can answer other questions if you have them, but I think that's just my initial response on that.
Thank you.
Other Rock Haven questions? If not, then Human Services Board is our next department. Human Services, as you know, is our largest department. So they have many divisions and programs, which takes a little bit of time to get through, very complex and detailed budget. So I'll do my best to hit the highlights there, but of course, welcome questions if anybody wants to get into more detail. So the first division, if we want to think about it in divisions, Children, Youth, and Families Division, you can see I've listed here different kinds of programs: Child Protective Services, Youth Justice, the U.S. Services Center, and Children's Long-Term Support. When we think about our children's programming, one of the things that was highlighted last year was highlighted again here on the revenue, where we received significant resources in the most recent biennial budget for our CPS function. And so we anticipate getting that $1.16 million again, and 2021 as part of that effort. And we'll talk about that here again in a minute. On the revenue side, significant change in the inflow and outflow of dollars in our budget is for the Children's Long-Term Support Program. Due to a state change, it'll look like we have $3.9 million less in revenues and expenditures because the state is taking over sort of how they're using those dollars and not funneling them through our budget. So you'll see that change. And you can see the revenue for Birch 3 program here, budgeted at $380,000, and we'll talk about the expenditures for that program here in just a moment. But we are getting an increase, at least in our budget anticipation for birth to 3. Expenditures, so I referenced that money we're getting through the state, and you can see here of how those dollars are to be spent in 2021. You can see the biggest amount, that $365,000, is for those 5 new positions. The county board has already taken action to create those positions. The incentive pay, that was a big part of our discussion last year. That continues in this year for CPS caseworkers. You can see some funding for different types of consulting services, and I won't go through those, but you can see them here. Several different priority areas identified by Human Services. Out-of-home placements, still $200,000 going to out-of-home placements to offset the county levy costs. We have some funds for positions, analyst position that was in here last year as well, devoted to the purposes that you see here about barriers to permanent placements of children in the CPS system, quarter over time of a quality improvement coordinator, and then $53,000, which is 800 hours for what we call targeted safety support. Services now dedicated to keeping at-risk kids safe in their homes versus the more costly out-of-home placements. I won't go through all of the numbers here you see about what our out-of-home placements for children and youth are right now. You saw those slides I had during the presentation, and those are out on the website. Overall, though, just hit the numbers again. Recommended budget for out-of-home placements is just under $5.3 million, which is about a reduction of $1 million, or 16% from the prior year, as we see what we anticipate really and hope is some of the increased investment in those in-home safety services are making a difference. One thing to note too, a term that I just highlight that you'll continue to see in future years, the Families First Act. That's a federal act that has been passed over the next several years. You're going to see much of the changes in operations in this area to be in compliance with that new federal law. And it's really kind of related to things we've been talking about for years about prioritizing keeping kids safe in their homes versus out-of-home placements. And so just keep your eye when you see that Families First Act, a lot of things coming about that. And if you've noticed in several of the resolutions that have come before you this year, you've seen that term there as well, as we've already started to realign some of our staffing resources to meet the expectations of that new act. Personnel-wise, a couple things to note: just a reclassification of a supervisor to a lead supervisor to take on a more supportive role for the CPS program manager position, which, is, you can imagine, is a difficult job. So that lead position change would cost $1,770 next year, as well as 2 additional human services professional positions in children's long-term support at a cost of $112,000, and that is fully covered by non-county resources. So in human services, typically after each division, I pause to see if there's questions before I go on to the next. Is there any questions about the Children, Youth, and Families programming that I can answer for you? If not, we'll allow more of those questions at the end when we get to the end of the department. But for now, we'll move on to behavioral health. So program areas in behavioral health, comprehensive community services, or CCS. We have our intake, crisis, and outpatient services programs here as well, and the community support program, or CSP. CCS, as you may recall from those of you that have been here for several years, an area of significant growth over the past several years, but in the last 2, really into 21, we're seeing a fairly stable CCS program. Overall revenue of $7.2 million, increase of $230,000 there for our CCS program in 2021. You can see here as well, revenue has been challenging as it relates to our interaction with clients and how we are to be reimbursed. We received waivers in 2020 to be able to provide services through a telehealth virtual process. And so one thing that we're hoping to do in 21, as we've learned that has actually gone pretty well. Some clients have really liked that, and it's actually helped quite a bit in some areas. And so we're looking to invest a little money here to kind of formalize that telehealth approach. So we continue to do that going forward. You can see here that I've highlighted a couple different things that I wanted to note for you. If you just give me a second here to find them. One thing that I wanted to note about out-of-home placements, and I actually just now seeing that page is missing from the online version, so that's why I was having trouble finding it to highlight it for you. So I'll just talk about it, which is page 27, that is missing. Talks about the out-of-home placements for adults in our behavioral health division. So unlike in the children's area, we expect to see an increase in 2021. We're budgeting for a $386,000 increase, so that the 2021 budget would have $5.1 million for out-of-home placements for adults. Part of that, and the biggest amount, really would be for the state institute. State institute costs are going up, both based on just increased census for us. We're budgeting to have one more individual in the state institutes, plus the rates have gone up in 2020 and into 2021 as well. For all out-of-home placements overall, about $3.8 million in levy dedicated to this, which is over $400,000 more than the prior year. And I won't go through all the different placement types that we have there. Personnel-wise, a couple of changes to note in the community support program. So deleting a position that was approved last year but not filled, instead reallocating those monies for more psychiatrist time for our clients. And then deleting a psychiatric technician position and recreating that FTE into a position that's already created to try to address turnover. Also, a couple new positions that you can see here as well that are related to the Family Recovery Court. And so you may recall the Family Recovery Court received a grant to create that program in the last couple of years as well, and just sort of changing the model of how we want to provide services to this, as we've learned through implementation, to improve service provision to the families here that are receiving services from us. So those two positions will cost us $148,000. We had tried to fund those through the CCS program, which was fully reimbursed, and that wasn't working well based on the model that CCS has. And so reallocating some funds instead from contracted substance abuse treatment, which the next question is, are we having enough money in our substance abuse treatment? The answer is yes, we should have sufficient funds to continue to provide the level of services needed next year and still reallocate and dedicate to these two positions. So I'll stop there on any of the behavioral health programs. Ask if there's any questions. If not, while you're thinking about that, we'll move on to economic support. So on the revenue side, we're expecting a decrease in our economic support revenue down to about $8 million. I would note that, as a reminder, Rock County serves as the lead county for the Southern Consortium, which has 6 other counties in it. So $3.7 million, excuse me, will be passed through to these other 6 counties in 2021. We make up about half of the total caseload in the consortium of those counties. Expenditures also, similar decrease in expenditures are expected next year overall in our operational costs. Not so much though in the costs of the benefits that our clients will receive due to COVID. As I mentioned during the budget presentation, the caseloads have increased pretty significantly at the highest level since 2015, and I won't go through those numbers again, but you do see them here. The one significant change really in the department is personnel related. I mentioned that during the presentation as well. Reallocation of our economic support specialists at a cost of just under $40,000. That helps to address kind of what we're seeing as marketplace based turnover and recruitment issues that we want to address. I've also noted that that's another area where the utility aids funds would support that cost. Any economic support related questions? Administrative Services Division, just again, like it says, or actually, I think I've missed, they missed the ADRC there, hold on. The ADRC is next, and the Adult Protective Services Division, like I mentioned, under the Council on Aging, nothing in here related integration. More to come soon on that. So you can see here, revenue received, we expect to receive about 1.8 million in state and federal aid. It's a little bit less than the prior year, but all of our staff costs and the costs of operating the ADRC are funded through time studies and reimbursement and drawing down those funds. So no levy dedicated to that function in 2021 again. Expenditures, one thing I would note about expenditures for the ADRC is our family care payment. So you may remember 5 years ago when the county transitioned to the family care program, and we were one of the last counties in the state to do so. There's a cost, sort of a cost to continue that we have to pay to the state every year of $2 million, just over $2 million. The structure of that was over 5 years. That was reduced from a higher payment that we were to make down to that $2 million. So in 2021 is the last year where we moved down to that. So we're going to save $190,000 in that payment for a partial year payment in 2021, but in future years, we won't have any savings from that family care reduction. So we'll just have the same amount going forward in our budget. I've also noted here about referrals to Adult Protective Services that we see increasing again as we have over the last couple of years. I won't, you can see those numbers there. I won't talk about that, but just as a reminder that that's another important issue that we're seeing in our clients. Any questions about ADRC and APS? If not, administrative services, as I said, this is the administrative division over the whole department. Lots of money flows in and out. It's where the finance, technology, records exist. One of the things that happens in administrative services are general pots of money. One is called the Wisconsin Medicaid Cost Reporting Program, or WMCR. Very hard from year to year to know how much funding we might get back from the state at the end of the year through this program, based on just a variety of eligible costs in different programs. So we expect us to receive $1.3 million, a slight decrease from the prior year, again, just to be a little more conservative in our budgeting for what we expect. Expenditures, things like job center lease costs are in here. Those will be changing in future years once we move into 17. You can see other related or other expenditures in here are related to personnel. So here in the Administrative Services Division is where we have our second equity manager position. The same price and cost for both wages and benefits as we talked about in the administrator's office. Human Services is really the department where we have the most contact with clients who may be disparately affected by their economic situation or by other background environment situations. And so having a equity manager in the Human Services Department really will allow the department to address kind of the frontline client services that they have. And you can see here on some of the, again, I've kind of reiterated the need for us to implement the county board's recommendations, the resolutions this year on how to address systemic racism and, again, the equity and disparate impact on our clients, and particularly in human services, which of all our departments has the most developed diversity and inclusion approach so far. And so I think they're ready to take the next step as well. Also, a couple other personnel requests, reclassification of support service supervisor positions, not much cost to that in 2021. And then a vacant word processing operator position that we're looking to change to a medical records technician. The value in this change would be consolidate all of the Rockhaven medical records functions into one position. Rockhaven contracts with Human Services for those functions right now. The departments have been talking about maybe transferring that position to Rockhaven, maybe in the 2022 budget. So by consolidating all those functions in one position, that would make a potential transfer in the future easier. So if we talk about the department overall, you can see here the variety of expenditures and tax levy in the divisions. Children, Youth, and Families is a $28 million operation with about $19 million in levy, which is a $991,000 decrease. Behavioral Health Division total expenditures of $25 million, levy of $13.5 million, which is an increase of $1.2 million. Economic support, we have a total operational budget of just about $9 million. The levy is $963,000, which is a small decrease. And again, expenditures in the ADRC and Adult Protective Services Division total $4.7 million. And you see the levy involved there. Overall in the Human Services Department, it's a $67.7 million budget. Like I said, our largest department. Recommended levy of $23.4 million, which is an increase of less than 1%, just about $156,000. Are there any other questions about any of our human services budget recommendations? I'll pause there for just a minute because it's a fairly large operation. Move on to the Arrowhead Library System. So the Arrowhead Library System is one of our two functions in the county that is we call our limited levy. So the amount of tax levy that we pay to the Arrowhead Library System is not under our levy limits. So it's outside of our regular levy limits. So I'll jump down here to the next page and kind of point out what is really the most important things for the county about the operations and the funding. There are two different types of funding, the participating library payment and the intersystem agreement. You can see here the 2020 budget for each of the communities and the 2021 request. When we think about the intersystem agreement, we pay about $83,000 to other counties for Rock County residents, the rural Rock County residents' use of those other county libraries, which is an increase of about $9,500. When you think about the participating library payment, it's a good reminder that there are actually two formulas that are used to calculate what we pay to the municipal libraries in the county for the rural residents' use of those municipal libraries. The county board's created its own funding formula many years ago. In 2005, the state established its funding formula. And so the way it works is that whichever is higher is what the municipal libraries get. And so the county formula, I'd just like to point this out, results in a payment of $1.16 million under the participating library payment, which is $191,000 more than if we just use the state required payment. Overall, the budget for next year reflects an increase of about $49,000 due to more town use of municipal libraries. So here you can see there, total levy, just over $1.2 million, which is an increase of $58,941, about 5% from the prior year. Questions on Arrowhead Library? Planning and Development Committee is next. Start with real property. So our comments on real property here consolidate things going on in the real property lister department, as well as the land records program. Land records has the revenue source as a portion of some of the register of deeds fees. And so that goes to fund our land records activities. Also funding land records is fund balance. We build up a fund balance through unspent funds from year to year. We have a fund balance of about $317,000 left every year. I recommend using a little bit of that to offset the cost of operations. In 2021, I'm recommending about $42,000 of fund balance. So you can see under expenditures, several activities, IT types of support for land records activities. We charge back to this account money for an intern or two to support land records activities. And you can see here a variety of contracted services for time of the real property lister, the GIS specialist, and the surveyor's work are charged back to land records amongst a couple other things. Overall, the recommended levy in the real property lister's office is $207,000. That's a decrease of about $3,000 from the prior year. Land records has no levy associated with it. Questions about land records or real property? Next is the planning department. So some significant changes in the planning department, as I already referenced when we talked about land conservation. But first start with revenue. So zoning permits are budgeted to increase a couple $1,000s in 2021. Again, this is a sort of a housing related housing economy situation, as I mentioned in the registered deeds office. So one bright spot for revenue. One thing that we're not budgeting for going forward here is revenue from municipalities. We had put some money anticipating maybe some support was going to be needed by the towns for comprehensive plans. That doesn't seem to be something that, given changes in state law, is happening anymore. And so we've taken that out as an anticipated revenue source. The main change here to talk about is related to personnel. So as I noted before, we're changing the oversight of these two departments, and we'll now have a director of land conservation planning and development under the proposed budget. Here, that's a savings of about $81,000 in this budget due to that 50-50 split and the way we've changed the pay grid structure. The other changes personnel related in here to accommodate that, like we talked about land conservation, would be a reallocation of the senior planner, one range from pay range 22 to 23 at a cost of about $3,000. Like I talked about in land conservation, the idea of having a lead position, acting director position, to take on some of those management roles with a director that's split between the two departments. Also retitling our senior planner GIS manager to just GIS manager, given the change in our senior planner position I just referenced. And the reallocation of the surveyor, I'm recommending a reallocation of one pay range at a cost of $2,800 to make that more in line with comparable counties and internal consistency. So summary overall recommended tax levy for the planning department, just under $600,000. That's a $60,000 decrease, about 9%, due to those staffing changes largely that we talked about. Also just note here, for the past several years, I've talked about the housing program as fund balances. The department, the committee have made several changes this year to get some new initiatives for some of these funds, including things like solar, lead pipe, reduction, working with health department, rehabilitating tax delinquent property. So that will help get some of those funds out into the community and revolving again as loans. Questions about the planning budget? Yes, Supervisor Sweeney. Yeah, so the difference, the personnel request, the department requested that the surveyor move from pay range 21 to 23. I recommended that it go from 21 to 22 and not all the way to 23. As I noted here in the comments, what I thought was an increase which would make it more consistent with comparable counties. But I felt that aligning the position in pay range 22, which is where the GIS manager is, would be internal consistency given their specialized skill sets.
Okay, and then another question on the senior planner. Is that position that you were discussing or thinking of, that assistant to the director in that position?
Yep. Okay. Yeah, so that's the position that we talked about at the committee that would take on some of those lead acting duties, kind of, not necessarily be titled assistant director, but kind of be that senior lead position that could serve as acting director, just like the senior conservation specialist in land conservation would serve in a similar role in land conservation. So still called senior planner, just like in land conservation, we'll have a senior conservation specialist, but have sort of acting director duties as part of their job description when Andrew, in this case, would be out of the office or doing other things in another department.
Thank you.
Davis with a question.
Yes, Supervisor Davis.
Do you anticipate the building permits to continue to increase? I noticed they were greatly increased this year and haven't been this high in about 10 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things I think that, in talking to Andrew and others involved is, one of the effects I think of the pandemic has been as people have trying to been staying home, they've been doing more work on their houses and more zoning related things have been required. And so I think the assumption here is that the sort of the increase we've seen in 2020, with the pandemic continuing to 21, the strong housing that we've seen in other sectors and other departments, we expect that to continue. So I don't know that it's a trend we continue to see for multiple years necessarily, but we did make an assumption that that's going to continue into 2021 at least, and if not for all of the year, at least a portion of the year.
Very good.
Next is Public Safety and Justice, and we'll start with the Sheriff's Office. So we'll start with law enforcement services. Sheriff's budget is largely broken down between law enforcement services and the correctional facility. So starting with law enforcement services, a couple things noticed here, most notably in the revenue side, sales tax revenue is significantly increasing in the sheriff's budget overall. Just over $1 million in sales tax, most of which is in law enforcement services division. And you can see here several things, most notably the portable radio replacement. So that's over $600,000 cost to replace portable radios. Again, this is just a situation where the equipment is aging and it's just time to replace this. I would note that this will be done in conjunction with the city of Janesville to try to get some better costs on our bulk purchases. Sales taxes are also funding vehicle replacement for just under $300,000. I would note an error here in the description under sales tax. We have airboat replacement. That's just a carryover from last year. It's really the sheriff's Boston Whaler that's being replaced in this recommendation. And you can see then the normal purchases that we have often funded with sales tax for the vehicle video recorders, the warning siren. An outdoor storage trailer is new, where there's just a storage trailer that is beyond its useful life and rotting out that needs to be replaced, and the night vision goggles. So revenue up pretty significantly in the division here. Expenditures, so here a little bit more information about the squads and where they will be. I see Supervisor Baumkamp, you've raised your hand. Go ahead.
I was just going to comment on the, that isn't anything to do with the airboat. That's the Boston Whaler. That's their rescue boat. That's like 20 years old. It needs to be replaced. The airboat was all taken care of last year in that budget.
Yep.
We talked about that in the committee.
Yeah. Yep. So that was a error that
should be changed. Yeah.
I should mark that out in your budgets. Thank you. Expenditures, spending a little bit more on vehicle maintenance and repair, budgeting gasoline, the same amount going into next year. You can see some of the other types of costs here. Software maintenance going up a little bit. You can see several areas, new digitized evidence software, which has already been approved by the board, will go into place next year, which will help significantly with operations. And you can see some other things here as well. Yeah, I would, maybe this would be where it'd be appropriate to just note that, the sheriff's comments about body cameras. So not having received that grant, and you remember having gone through the process of trying to expedite receipt of those funds if we did receive that grant. And now that we know that won't be happening, we'll work with the sheriff to figure out how to best bring that back to you as the sheriff and his team figure out what the right number of body cameras is. And figure out, kind of what the most appropriate mechanism and vehicle and timing is to bring that back to the board. So just be watchful for that soon. I think that'll come back here in fairly short order, as it seems to be a priority. So just note that. Personnel, reclassification of 6 public safety utility clerk positions, become administrative assistants. That will cost us $19,589. So again, as the duties have been increasing for those public safety clerk positions, and also this will give some flexibility to the sheriff and his team to cross-train what will then be a significant number of administrative assistant positions across the department. Correctional services, this is really where we have much more of our change and our cost changes in 2021. So start with electronic monitoring. So expect electronic monitoring fees to increase in 2021 as the sheriff and his team anticipate putting more folks out, on the bracelet. Also, another change here, I would just note, I guess you could call another error under municipal inmate revenue. So the increase is $28,000 in this budget. That is not due to the municipalities changing the sentencing computation, but only based on historical trends averaging from year to year. So just so you realize and understand that that was not the criteria on which was used to make that budget decision. So jump down to expenditures. Here's where several significant changes are as well. So we look at contracted services. Although our fees are going up for electronic monitoring, our expenditures are also going up, and typically expenditures go up faster than revenues because we don't always collect from our clients. Correctional services contracts include advanced correctional healthcare. So this is our inmate healthcare program. So costs in 2020, we budgeted over $1 million now, closer to $1.1 million. That's an increase of $60,000, about 6% higher than the prior year. Our costs for inmate healthcare go up pretty significantly every year, just like healthcare does everywhere. Meal costs are budgeted at about $580,000, a slight increase, about 1% as well. Personnel, if I can jump down to personnel. Again, here's where it's noted about the courthouse security staff. The action, though, that's requested in 2021 is a reallocation of our 5 correctional supervisor positions, really related to internal equity and external comparison to positions in comparable counties is recommended. So overall, in law enforcement services, including emergency management, $11.4 million is the levy, which is a fairly insignificant increase from the prior year. Correctional services, though, $12.5 million. That's a almost $713,000 increase, a 6% increase over the prior year. So overall, sheriff has a $23.4 million budget. The increase is $715,609 or 3.1% over the prior year. Are there any questions that we can answer on the sheriff's budget?
This is Supervisor Levy. Just one quick question. So is it my understanding that body cameras will come in next year? And we will
so I think
implement.
Yep. So what we anticipate is we'll bring to the county board in some fashion, and we haven't decided yet exactly how to do that, whether it's a resolution or through the budget, possibly depending on when the vendor tells us we can receive those. Is a resolution or some vehicle for you to make a decision about whether you want to authorize the purchase of those body cams. So the sheriff's committed to bring that to you, so you can decide how you want to move forward with that. The anticipation, though, I think Supervisor Levy, would be that yes, if approved by the county board, that would be something that would be implemented no later than early 2021.
Okay,
the question really remains about, the question remains about funding sources and process and timing at this point that we still have to figure out before we bring that back to you.
Yeah, that was going to be my other question, the funding source. If we didn't get the grant, I didn't know he had figured it into his budget for 2021, at least an estimated amount. So when it comes back to us, we don't have to send it back for budgetary or funding reasons.
Right. So if we were to get that grant, as you remember, there was some authorization to move forward with that purchase had we gotten the grant, and I'll have to have further county board action to accept the grant. Under the grant, we anticipated getting that. If we would have gotten it, would have been in October. We anticipated moving ahead with that yet this year. And so there would have been funding, that would have been outside of what had been budgeted this year. Given that we did not get that grant and those funds were those were outside of the budget, the decision that the board will have to make, will be about funding sources from a capital perspective. There's different ways to do that, whether, could be a general fund allocation, could be, sales tax related. There's different capital sources available for that outside of the budget. Depends on what, cost the sheriff and his team bring forward, sort of what's the expanse of that implementation.
Okay, thanks.
Are there other questions on the sheriff's budget? Next is the court budget. So the courts is another area where we're anticipating some increased revenue. And you can see listed here several areas. One notably includes state aid, which saw an increase in the biennial budget as well. And so we see the sort of second year of that here as well. We do see some decreases though, including in fine and forfeiture revenue and various line items as we continue to implement our evidence-based decision-making and some of those go down. We do see another couple of increases related to guardian ad litem collection fees and court-appointed counsel reimbursements due to some collection efforts. In the clerk of court's office, you'll see a slight increase in revenue for a few things netted out overall. An increase from interest on judgments, but investment interest is down overall. On the expenditure side, I guess I would just jump to personnel to note a couple things. A couple of personnel requests that I did not recommend. One would be to reclassify the chief deputy clerk of court to a court manager title position at a higher pay range. Another one was to reallocate the 6 judicial assistant positions at a cost of about $15,659. And so I've not recommended that either. With regard to the judicial assistants, as I've noted here in my comments, that's something that we anticipate reassessing in 2022. The judicial assistants just happen to be in a range, an area that a change there would have other effects on several other positions within the pay grids. And so maybe want to address that a little more holistically together, and we'll look at that again in 2022. So overall levy for the circuit court, just over $1 million. That's a decrease of about $35,000. Mediation and family court services, we have $136,000 or so in levy, which is an increase of $14,000. And the clerk of circuit court, just under $1.5 million, which is about a $50,000 decrease. So overall, for all those court functions, we've got $2.67 million, which is about a $70,000 decrease from the prior year. Are there questions about the courts? $911 center is next. So you can see here under revenue, we've got $258,400 in sales tax revenue to fund some projects that I'll talk about here in a moment. Just to note that that is a significant reduction from what was included in 2020. No other revenue other than tax levy in the 911 center budget. So here we have some of our capital projects and microwave radio electronics, a mobile radio to help with communications between Greene County's new system, air handling unit in one of our tower locations. Most notably, though, is our Master 3 updates. So $230,000 this year to continue that 5-year project. The total over that time frame, we're talking about $1.8 million for our equipment upgrades. And if you have questions about the Master 3 program, if Kathy is on, she can certainly answer those better than I could. Personnel, most notably personnel changes in the 911 budget. So I'll just run through these, I guess, real quick. You've seen some of this before. Call taker position reallocation at a cost of just under $8,000. Reallocation of our 32 telecommunicator positions at a cost of $135,000. Our shift supervisors at a cost of nearly $17,000. And those reallocations are made to address, turnover, basically recruitment and retention, as we've kind of fallen behind our competitors out there in other counties, and even not 911 positions in other counties, but just other opportunities for employment, even at new places like Amazon and Dollar General, that pay wages that are competitive with some of our staff as well. Also, the department's requested a new training and quality assurance position, which is recommended. And I think it's just a matter of like turnover. Over time, things build up, and I think this has been coming for a while. Where, given the significant training needs, particularly if we have several new staff, we've had retirements, and the training needs are significant out there, both to meet our accreditation standards, but also just to make sure that we're providing a good response, which, as all of you know, can be life or death when someone calls 911. So this position will allow the shift supervisor to go back to supervising on the regular shift and not fulfilling that training role. And we have a position that would work from 2 to 11 that would really touch all 3 shifts to provide training. One request that is not recommended is to increase our 3/4 time geo application specialist to full-time. Not recommending that, as I said, but I am recommending it be retitled to a GIS coordinator. One more retitle is to change the operations manager to assistant director. So overall, the total cost of those personnel changes is just about $247,000. And as I've noted elsewhere, those are recommended to sort of be funded with those Alliant utility aids. Overall levy, $4.8 million. That's $340,000 or 7.6% increase. Any questions about 911?
Josh,
Yes, Supervisor Sweeney.
thank you. Is the pay grade for the operations manager versus the assistant director the same pay grade, and what is that pay grade?
Yes, it is the same pay grade. So just a title change is recommended there. I don't have that in front of me, but I'll pause in case any staff out there with quicker access to the pay grids is able to come up with that. We'll have another quick competition here because I think somebody can find it in pretty short.
This is Annette. Oh,
Go ahead, Annette.
it's pay range 27.
And what is the starting wage for that? And the
Yep, $72,787.68. And again, that's 2020 wages. That's the starting wage.
thank you. Any other communication center related questions? Next is the district attorney's budget. So it's a variety of fees in the DA's budget, and you can see them listed here. They're generally decreasing. The biggest one is really the victim witness state reimbursement. This is something that we always struggle with, feeling like we should get more than we do. This is something that was originally intended to be mostly funded with state revenues, and over time has fallen down to 42.5% of expenses being reimbursed. And so we're expecting a decreased budget to budget of just about $13,000 from the prior year. I would note here in the DA's budget that one of the effects here is, again, the health insurance formula intends to increase costs here. So much of the increase you see in the levy is not related to increased operational costs, but more just that reallocation of our health insurance funding. So overall, the district attorney's budget, tax levy budget of just over $2 million. That's an increase of about $167,000. Again, largely based on health insurance and staff costs. Any questions about the district attorney's budget? The medical examiner's budget is next. One of the things we've done over the last several years is talk about the increase in the cremation fee, which was limited in 2015. That could only be increased by the consumer price index, which is about 2.1%. So I'm recommending that we take advantage of that annual increment and increase our fee by 2.1%, which is a $5 increase. And you can see that will be up to $238. Given that increase, plus the budgeting for additional cremations, we'll have about $19,000 more in revenue in the ME's budget. The most significant expenditure in the budget is related to our contract with Dane County for management and oversight services. We have a 2-year intergovernmental agreement with Dane County, and every 2 years we renew that. You can see here that is included in our other professional services line item. We're budgeting about $330,000 for that in 2021, $11,000 increase, about 3.5% over the prior year per our contract. And you can see there's a variety of areas in which that breaks down with regard to our management oversight, forensic review, autopsies, transportation, and so forth. No personnel changes. So the levy for the ME's office, $744,000. That's a just under $10,000 increase, just over 1%. Questions in the ME's budget? Next is child support services. One of the interesting things about the child support services budget is that it's largely funded through federal reimbursement, matching 2/3 of costs. So you can see here we expect an increase in our reimbursement from the federal government of about $118,000. State revenue budgeted at about $1.3 million, which is a slight decrease. That funding is largely provided based on meeting performance standards, which the state is going through the process of changing the benchmarks and the standards that we have to meet. Contracted services, so that's a significant expenditure in child support budget, child support contracts with circuit courts, clerk court, and corporation counsel. Those are costs that then can 2/3 be reimbursed by the federal government. So that's why they're here. You can see several other types of costs. I would note laboratory costs are going up. They're going to increase about $24,000 or to $24,000, which is a $3,500 increase based on our contract with our vendor for blood drawing and genetic testing. Genetic testing is one of those areas where we had to get creative. Some of you may have heard that we're doing drive-through genetic testing in the front of the courthouse now, instead of having staff come up into the courthouse or clients come into the courthouse. So kudos to our child support staff for being creative during the pandemic. Personnel, two changes, a reclassification of a clerk typist 3 position, two of those positions to be case initiation specialists. Those are positions that are doing more specific work on, as the title indicates, initiating cases. So that'll give some new duties, focus for some staff, as well as provide a promotional opportunity for the department to retain some staff. That'll cost about $4,400. And then just a retitle with no financial impact, changing the title of our financial workers to financial specialists. So overall, the levy for child support is $487,000. That's about a $150,000 decrease from the prior year. Do we have any questions about child support services? Evidence-based decision-making is in the back of the Public Safety and Justice section. So just a couple comments on this. There new programming that we've started this year and implemented is the pretrial assessment supervision program for our in-custody offenders. Delayed a little bit by COVID-19, but we did start doing that through the virtual court hearing process. So again, providing information to the judges to make decisions on release of offenders pending court dates. We do that through a contracted vendor, Justice Point. Also, we'll be having this new diversion program we've started out of the district attorney's office for low-risk offenders, as well as what we continue to plan for our what we call our enhanced deferred prosecution program for higher risk offenders. Overall, we've included $481,000 in the budget. That's the same as last year, so no increase. And as we continue to ramp up these programs over the years, we'll just keep monitoring, excuse me, monitoring as to whether or not this more resources are needed here. But for now, as we implement this, this should be sufficient for 2021. Any EBDM related questions? Public Works is next. So we'll start with parks. Several different sorts of user fees that you can see here: boat landing fees, park use fees, rental from the house in Gibbs Lake. Overall, total of $66,000 in revenue from park use fees. Expenditure-wise, capital projects. I'm recommending two capital projects, including $60,000 for improving the horse lot at Gibbs Lake Park and Magnolia Bluff Park, as well as $50,000 to replace the playground equipment at Sweet Allen. You remember that was another one of the projects that was budgeted in 2020 that we put off because of concern about sales tax. Those will both be sales tax funded in 2021. Several projects, mostly shelter related, that I did not recommend at this time. All three included in the newly adopted POROS plan. Just did not recommend them at this time due to priorities about use of sales tax dollars and uncertainty of the receipt of those funds going into 21. But as always, just note that we do have some ATC funds remaining at about $417,000 if anybody wishes to move forward with those projects this year. That funding is available. Before I get into highway, I'll stop there on parks. Any questions about the parks budget? Supervisor Sweeney?
Thank you. With the allocation of dollars towards the horse facility at Gibbs Lake, is there a plan to garner some revenue via fees from that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something that the Public Works Committee even talked about at its last committee meeting. We've talked about that for a couple of years. I think that that's something that stays on the radar. There's some, I think, hesitancy to move forward with that for a variety of reasons. Implementation, not sure how exactly to implement it in a way that would be enforceable. How much would it cost to implement that program? Would doing something like a boat landing fees model be sufficient, or would we need to do something else? In other counties, they have staff who don't passively, I guess, necessarily passively enforce that, but are out sort of actively enforcing it, as well as what impact would that have on our friends groups that maintain those trails and are the largest users. So there have been discussion about that, not included in this recommended budget, but I think that's something that the Public Works Committee will continue to talk about. If nothing else on parks, then we'll move on to highway. So a couple pieces of revenue here to point out. So we received funding from the state to maintain state highways. Expect to get just under $3.3 million in 21. That's the same amount that was included in 2020. General transportation aids, $2.7 million. That's about a $120,000 increase. over the 2020 budget. We will continue in 21 to anticipate having contracts with 13 of the 20 towns to provide winter and summer routine maintenance. So the charge for winter maintenance is budgeted to remain the same at $900 per centerline mile. It has been quite a few years since we have increased that. That would bring in about $576,000. Charge for routine maintenance will also remain at $1,700. We have not increased that rate since 2012, and it's not recommended to increase in this budget. Would note here that's a little different than the winter maintenance. This sort of represents a minimum that we expect the work the towns to have our staff do. Overall, we're budgeting about $2.5 million from that source in 2021. Expenditures, you can see here the county maintenance and construction account totals just over $11 million. Several important things to point out about what's going on here. Overall, several costs here: shouldering, bridge maintenance, crack sealing, grader patching. I'm recommending those total cost of $464,000 be funded through the department's working capital fund balance. At the end of 19, we had $2.8 million sitting in that fund balance. That accumulates for a variety of reasons, like other fund balances we've talked about, when projects come in under budget over the years, for example. And so it makes sense from year to year as that it builds up to put those back to operational costs. Several seal coating projects that are requested and recommended. I'm recommending funding the County S project from fund balance again. The $260,000 for the other two projects I'm recommending be funded with one-time allocation out of that utility aids funding that we talked about before. Blacktopping includes our county construction projects, and overall, about $5.9 million for those projects. We'll go through those here briefly. The County F project, again, was another sales tax funded project that was put on hold in 2020 that we're bringing back in 2021. We recommend to fund that with $479,000 in sales tax, and then really use additional $400,000 in state aid we're getting in the budget to offset the costs of that program, which is that $879,000 cost of that project. The County A project in 2021, recommending that we fund that with $3.2 million in deferred financing. Once we complete that project, currently planning to complete that in 2022, we'll get another $1 million from in state aid that will be included in the 22 budget to offset really what is the cost of both of these legs of County A. We won't get that until the second year, but just know that is coming. Our County K project at $1.485 million, eligible for $315,000 in state aid, and I'm recommending the remainder of that be funded with deferred financing. Design costs for County O and County J, funded with almost $300,000 in sales tax. Again, these were projects that were put off in 2020. So you can see overall in the county maintenance construction account, spending a little less than last year. Includes $776,000 in sales tax and $4.4 million in borrowing for highway projects. Every year we fund what we call the Bridge Aid, Town Bridge Aid Program. The towns call it the County Bridge Aid Program because we share in those costs. And so this is our second limited levy, like the Arrowhead Library System, that is not included in the levy limits that the state imposes on us. There's two specific bridge projects in 2021 that are recommended. Those are also to be funded with some federal aid. And we also include an additional $50,000 in here for projects that may arise during the year. We also have a county bridge project on County J, also a federal aid project. Our share of that will be $325,000, and I'm recommending sales tax for that project. And then we have two other projects that are partially funded with federal aid on County D and County F in next year as well. And those are also sales tax funded. So you can see our list of federal aid projects as well. Capital equipment, always a significant investment in capital equipment in the highway division every year. As a reminder, we purchase these with cash, available cash we have available, and depreciate those over a number of years. So the cost of purchase does not appear in the operational budget. The cost appears as depreciation every year. So it's important to keep in mind not only the purchase price, which in the 2021 budget is recommended to be $3.1 million for the equipment that you see listed, but the annual depreciation cost of almost $209,000. That's what will hit the levy. So that's sort of the levy cost over, and then again, that's sort of an estimate of what we expect to see in the levy, because what will actually hit be our costs will be when we start to depreciate that, when we receive those pieces of equipment that you see here on the list, including again a little bit more on the capital equipment as the department's trying to implement a 5-year plan to decrease the average age of the equipment that we have in the fleet in the inventory, and so trying to put some resources there to again be consistent with the matrix study from several years ago that recommended we reduce the average age of our capital equipment. Personnel-wise in the department, we have 2 highway worker positions that I'm recommending be reclassified to the title of highway sign makers. So these are positions that are already doing this work right now. They already dedicated, their duties aren't changing. But after a review about the specialized duties they have in their sign making responsibilities, we thought it was appropriate to change their classification. And so that will cost us about $3,000 next year. So overall, if we look at the department in parks, $917,000 in expenditures, a levy of $653,000, which is a $48,000 increase, 8% increase for parks. Expenditures in the highway total $19.3 million, a levy of 2.6, which is down about $635,000 from the prior year. Overall, in public works, you've got a $20.2 million budget, levy of $3.3 million, which again is down by $587,000. Town bridge aids, as I noted, on the limited levy, total next year $148,000. Questions about highway?
Davis has a question.
Go ahead.
I was curious about the pie charts. I noticed expenditures by division, the parks was 5%. And then I looked at the levy, that was at 20% for parks. Why is that so different? I don't understand it.
Oh, I see the pie charts there, right? So that's basically a sort of a visual recognition that, even though parks is obviously much smaller, and so therefore has much less expenditures, we get much more funding for highway, a lot of funding for highway. So comparatively, the percentage of our costs in parks are higher to be funded with levy than they are in the percentage of our highway operations. And so,
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
With the equipment, with the changes in the interstate, how's that going to impact our equipment budget?
That's a good question. So we first saw the change to the equipment budget a couple years ago when the county board approved the purchase of a number of quads. Those are the big snowplow trucks. As we anticipated the need to be able to plow differently on the interstate with expanded lanes. So we purchased those. Trying to remember the specific years. It seemed like maybe that was purchased in 2019. We received those this year. They're being outfitted this year in anticipation of being put into service, in the coming winters as we have more lane miles open now in the county. So that was an example of where we spent a significant amount of money of cash to buy those quads and to continue to depreciate those over the years. That would be the main way in which we've planned for equipment differences. There's other things, and if Dewey's on, he could certainly speak to that. But there's other things that we've talked about, with regard to plow equipment, changing needs, sort of like snow blowers and different ways to get snow off the interstate, and even related to the sound barriers that are up now. So so we've started to do that. Dewey could speak more to that if he's on and if he wants to. But that we started thinking about that a couple of years ago.
Yeah, Josh, this is Dewey. I did. You covered that pretty well, but if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Hope you answered my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dewey. Any other public works related questions? Before we leave public works, I'll note rail transit. So rail transit, as you're aware, we're members of two different rail transit commissions. Overall, $30,000 their annual payment. We've had in 2020, we'll have that again with this budget as well. So not a whole lot there other than that payment, but certainly if anybody has any questions, I can answer those. So our last department is under the Airport Committee, the Southern Wisconsin Regional Airport. As far as revenues go, we expect from various sources to receive just over $400,000 in revenue, things like fuel, flowage, and landing fees, which is expected to be down next year. We're still trying to anticipate the effect of the pandemic on air travel. Lease costs going up, or lease revenue going up, largely due to the addition of some new hangars that were built in 2020. T hangars continue to be a revenue source for us. We do have some non-aviation sources as well. On the expenditure side, mostly the capital projects that we talk about. As you remember, there's three different sources of revenue we have to fund our capital projects: federal aid projects, state aid projects, and county funded projects. Fed aid projects, we get a 90% federal reimbursement with 5% from the state and 5% from the county. Best deal that we get in any capital reimbursement project. The only thing we're asking to fund next year is the continuation of the cost of our broom truck replacement. So we have some funding that we had in prior year budgets, and this amount of $7,500 will round that whole project out as far as our contribution goes. No state aid projects next year. There is one county funded project, which is entirely 100% county funded. $160,000 is recommended from the airport fund balance to improve runway 1836. This is a resurfacing project that we've needed for some time. You may remember this came up during an FAA inspection, that this is something that we ought to address. So the recommendation is to put some money into this to resurface 1836. Again, this is a project that we had put on hold in 2020, but now we're going forward with again in 21. Also of note, stormwater charges. We talked about this for the last several years. Stormwater charges in 21 are increasing in the budget by $24,000. That's another 30% increase. We continue to see significant increases to our stormwater charges from the city of Janesville. Those continue to be an issue of discussion at the airport board. Variety of capital assets totaling $67,300, funded mostly by sales tax. And you can see just a variety of things here from door safety issues, fire extinguishers, water softener issues as well. No personnel requests. So overall, the recommended levy at the airport, $539,000. That's about $11,000 or 2.1% increase over 2020. Any questions about the airport's budget? Well, that was our last department. Are there any other questions about the budget overall, either a specific department that you want to come back to, or just questions in general that we didn't cover as we went through each department?
I've got a question.
Go ahead, Supervisor Bryan.
I want to go back to the Rock Haven budget.
Yes.
The medical director, there's no line item covering that in the budget. You had told me that's covered under contracted services, but there's no line item for contracted services in Rock Haven. So how much do we plan on spending on that position? How much have we spent on it in the past?
Good question. So if I remember correctly, and the reason maybe you don't see it is that the reference to contracted services gets rolled up into another line item in the budget that you have in front of you, and so maybe that's why it's harder to find. If I remember correctly, and I'll go find it here if you give me a minute. It seems like to me in 2020 we budgeted around $150,000 for our contract with the medical director. I'll have to just pull it up here to see if I can find what we budgeted, what we're anticipating budgeting in 21. Maybe you'll have to give me a minute here to find it. To try to remember where that expenditure is. Again, maybe some of the other staff will race to see if they can beat me in finding it in the budget. In the comments, you mean? Okay. Let me see if I can find that actual dollar for you. Okay. Okay, so it looks like the budget isn't changing a whole lot from budget to budget. We budgeted in 2020 $141,000. In 2021, the request is to budget $142,575. So I think the approach there was, is we're looking at a new model, not knowing kind of what that would look like there, just status quo from a budget perspective from year to year.
My other question then would be, when you were going through some of the other budgets, you had a line item for contracted services. Why is the Rock Haven budget different?
When you say there's a line for it, do you mean in the actual budget detail that's behind the administrator's comments, or are you talking about something I noted in the administrator's comments?
I can't remember exactly which ones it was, but there were some of them where you had mentioned the contracted services, so that's where I'm confused.
So it may just simply be that from one budget to the next, there are many departments where we contract for services. It may just be for whatever reason that I didn't highlight that in the comments. That's possible. Whether it was just an oversight or I was just highlighting other things, I guess I'm not sure as to why it was inconsistent between my comments in the department, if that's where the inconsistency was.
Thank you.
But if you want to, we can have a conversation maybe afterwards about where you're seeing the references, and I can think about maybe how to be more consistent in next year's budget about highlighting that from budget to budget.
One additional question from Davis.
Go ahead.
In the previous budget, we talked about cold storage trailers. Are those at the department, and are they operational?
You're talking about the cold storage trailers that we got early on in the pandemic for the medical examiner? Is
Correct.
that what we're talking about?
Correct.
Yeah, so we still have those. Those are still sitting out. I think they're at Public Works right now. And we've not had to use those, thankfully, for the pandemic, but we do still have those.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Josh, are we using a new model out at Rock Haven for the structure? If so, can you explain that a little bit better, please?
Yeah, sure. So the can build on comments at Rock Haven about change to the sort of the medical on-call oversight model, I guess, medical director model. So the way that it works right now, largely, and I'll do my best to get into the details of it. But we have a medical director who spends quite a number of hours out there. Historically, that's what we've done. We've had an on-site medical director who fulfilled the requirements of a medical director that we have to fulfill per state statutes, administrative code, and has also provided significant presence for essentially serving as kind of the primary care physician for a lot of the residents, which has been a convenience to have that individual out there to be able to do that. As I said and alluded to, at least the nurse practitioner has been used last several years as sort of an adjunct. So when that position was first created, we were anticipating that we'd have fewer hours for the medical director, and we'd fill them in with the nurse practitioner. Under state law, there's certain requirements when residents come into the facility. The first 90 days they're there, they have to be seen every 30 days, for example, and then every 60 days thereafter. And within those time frames, a physician has to see them a certain number of times, but a nurse practitioner could fill in, the other rounds, right? So that was kind of how we anticipated using those two positions together. That approach of having a medical director on site that much and in serving in a kind of a direct service model is not very common in skilled nursing facilities. What is more common is what we're looking at now, as I said, in partnership with some of the health systems, where we would certainly still have a medical director, because under state law you have to, but the medical director's role would not be the same as it is now. It would focus more on coordination of care, oversight of resident care policies, participation on what we call the QAPI, quality improvement committees, and in serving, in that way. As I said, providing guidance from a medical and clinical perspective, but not necessarily engaging in direct care services so much. What we would, hope to have happen is something where, if we're able to contract with the health system for medical director services, that, even though our medical director wouldn't be on site as much doing that direct care work, we would have more access to more physician resources. Potentially even, there are models, and I'm not sure this is what we would end up being able to do, but there are models out there where you have kind of a residency program where physicians come out and learn sort of gerontology and how to provide services to the residents in a nursing home. So that's why it's still a little vague and undefined in how we're describing it, because it's not quite settled yet, but that is, in concept, that is the approach that is kind of recommended in the budget to move towards, I guess, in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, just reminders on next steps. The public hearing on the budget is November 4th at 6 o'clock. And then adoption is the 10th at 6 o'clock. So in between tonight and the 10th, if there are any questions that you didn't get answered, or any questions that come up between now and then, just give me or Randy a call. That would be the easiest way to start, and then we can get you the answer that you need whether it's a finance question from Sherry or an HR question to Annette. So with that being said, I guess that turn it back over to you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Josh. And thank you very much for the presentation and all the hard work that went into preparing the budget for this year. Appreciate it. All right, next item, please.
Next item is item 12, adjournment.
So move Supervisor Boston.
Okay,
Second Supervisor Potter.
thank you. Okay, so we have a motion by Supervisor Bostwick and a second by Supervisor Potter. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed with no? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, folks.